Chapter 1. The Path to Heaven is a very good story. I just started writing it, so why did I say that? Does this mean that I'm arrogant or shameless? It's neither, because I already made it clear in the title that this is what I said in the first place. What's good about this story? First of all, I like it a lot. Of course, if I didn't like the story, I wouldn't have opened the book. The new book was delayed from mid-August to now. Other than being busy at home, the most important reason was that I really couldn't think of a story that could convince me to spend 2 years or even longer to write it. I've always felt that time is the most important thing, because I'm afraid of death. When I spend time on something, I must feel that the time spent is worth it. Only then can that life not be considered a waste. For every previous book, I can pat my chest and say that I measured it this way. Of course, I have to do the same for the new book. What made me especially happy was that in September, a story gradually surfaced in my mind. In the following process of designing and organizing, the story became clearer and clearer, and I liked it more and more. This liking even made me feel a sense of certainty towards the end. Maybe it's because the theme of the story is related to time and life. As for what the theme is, everyone will be able to see it later when they open the next page. It's very clear and simple. This time, I really said everything I wanted to say up front. This also shows how courageous I am. Why am I so courageous? Because the preparation work is good. In all of my novels, Night and the new book, The Path to Heaven, did the most preparation work before opening the book. Night's situation is a bit special. After writing The Spy, I felt that I had reached the peak of my life. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to write a good story anymore. I was very anxious, so I clenched my teeth and wanted to write an especially awesome novel. I always believe that hard work will be rewarded, and Night's situation is like this. Although up until now, my favorite is still The Spy, Night's writing is very good from the perspective of the novel as a whole. I really admire me for being able to write Night. Then why did I also prepare so seriously for The Path to Heaven? Last month, I said on my WeChat official account that The Path to Heaven might be my last 2 novels with a length of 3 million words. Therefore, I will use the most serious attitude to write, even if I overdo it and appear rigid and crafty, I will not hesitate. The so-called seriousness, of course, did not mean that he would never stop updating or update 3 times a day. Even if I said it, no one would believe me. I mean, I'm going to try more of the things I haven't done before, and the ambition. This was the first time I had used 4 words in the title of a book. I had done it on purpose. The story of the great path toward heaven would naturally be different from the previous novels. It was also done on purpose. No matter what I do, I should be serious and strive to do better. My requirement for myself is that every book is slightly different, and I strive to improve in certain aspects. What I want to do with the new book is plot flow. When I first started the book, I mentioned that I wanted to do this, but later on, I wasn't strict enough with myself, and the pressure I exerted on myself was too small. Once I entered the continuous updating stage, I started to slip out of habit. Although intentionally or unintentionally, there were definitely some chapters that were not as good as the ones he was referring to here. What I'm referring to here is the emotional expression outside of the plot, the opera-like arias. Because of my personal preference, I often use them in large chunks. For the new book, I want to reduce these contents as much as possible. This is to learn from many of the authors I like. Among these authors there are current ones and of course there are also those big names from the past. For example, Gene Young. His plots are very straightforward like carrot. When chewed, it feels delicious. I want to work hard in this area. I feel that this is the king of commercial novels, and it is also the supreme trust in the readers. Among web novelists, especially me, Sandbag, and many other authors with similar temperaments, every time they finish writing a plot, they are always worried that the readers will not see the beauty and subtlety in it, or that they will not understand something, or that the plot itself will bring about a lack of confidence and calmness. Therefore, they will explain for a long time in the later parts of the plot. It is especially long-winded, and it is very uncomfortable to watch. I want to change this problem a little. I also want to be stricter in terms of writing, and I want to reduce the description of scenery and psychology as much as possible. This is respect for the readers. I believe that everyone can see my thoughts, feelings, and aesthetics hidden in the novel. Will this cause the whole story to be too dry and not good to read? Just like the male lead of this story will say in the future, I have never thought about this problem. Everyone says that I have feelings, but I don't admit it. These are not things that I can casually say, except when I laugh at myself. I have never admitted that my writing is good. When it comes to writing, I have ordinary talent. I don't study hard, so how can I be good at it? I have to add that the writing of every book will be better than the last. This is for sure, because I am such a person with ambition. I digress. What am I really confident about? It is the plot. The stories I write have always had good plots. I hope my new book can strengthen this aspect. Of course, the plot of the new book will still be very cliché, because there is nothing new under the sun, and I grew up under the sun. This sentence was said 14 years ago, when Butcher Pig and I talked in the comments section of Inksio. Did I say it or did he say it? Of course, this sentence is not new, it is a Western proverb. Now that I think about it, he was the one who said it. No matter who said it, it has been 14 years, and I am 40 years old. I can't waste my life. Whether it is writing a book or doing anything else, I have to do what I like, strive to be liked by more people, and then be awesome. It is the same for reading books. I will say something taboo, but the story I write is for everyone to pass time. If the writing is not good, or if it does not suit your taste, then don't read it. Don't waste your time on this, it is better to play mahjong with your family. Of course, don't scold me. Everyone has their own hardships in life. Go your own way, understand each other, and the world is peaceful. Of course, I will not promise to constantly update or anything else. The only thing I can do and am willing to promise is to write this story as well as possible, not wasting your time or mine. I have actually said this before, but I might have forgotten, so I will say it again. Chapter 3. The 4 major cities are always full, so there is no doubt about the geomancy of this place. Therefore, you should write a new poem for me. In the fragrant valley of the secluded flowers, the cold algae dance and ripple. With the help of Yuchuan, the fairies don't necessarily miss each other. They even send people back with the flowing water. The setting sun lingers in the clouds, and the dew on the grass stains the clothes. Su Shi, the fairy by the river, wrote in the geomancy cave as an inscription. In the south of Chaotian, the Aoyama stretched for thousands of miles, with hundreds of peaks hidden in the clouds and fog all year round. The number 1 cultivation sect in the world, the Aoyama sect, was located here, but it was hard for the regular people to see its true appearance. Some regular villages and towns were scattered outside the Aoyama. One of them was located in the hilly area in the southwest, named Cloudy Town because of the fairy fog coming from the mountains. Cloudy Town had a beautiful scenery. It was the beginning of spring, with the gentle wind caressing the faces, the willows dancing in the wind, and the fog faintly discernible, looking like a fairyland. The residents of the town were used to the scenery, and the tourists in the restaurants were full of admiration for the scenery. Sitting by the window, In-san wanted nothing more than to eat hot pot. There is no problem in the world that can't be solved by eating hot pot. If there is, use 2 hot pot meals. This saying is quite popular in the underworld capital. I heard that it was spread from Zhaoga, but I think it should be from Ijo. As you know, we don't see the sunlight all year round, and it's damp and cold there. Who doesn't like hot pot? Wishing for a good harvest of mushrooms? You people on the ground like it, but we've been eating it for tens of thousands of years, and we're tired of it. I want to eat an authentic hot pot now, and then brag about it when I get back. What's wrong with that? Looking at the duck intestines and the Sichuan peppers floating in the red and spicy soup, he swallowed some saliva and lifted his head to look at a young girl sitting across from him. The young girl had a head full of shiny black hair, and her eyes and brows were picturesque, but she still looked childish. If she smiled, she would look very cute. But she didn't. Her eyelids were slightly lowered, and her long eyelashes didn't even blink. She looked like a portrait, not a real person. The room was still as quiet as before, and the footsteps of the pedestrians outside the window grew clearer. San said, "Well, I admit that I stayed because I wanted to watch the show, but who in the cultivation circle wouldn't want to watch the show? Are you going to punish me for this?" "No. Junior sister, could you please let go of this thing? Even if you don't let me go, at least let me eat a few bites first. If I don't fish out the tripe and yellow aorta in the pot, I won't be able to eat it." The duck intestines had sunk to the bottom of the soup, and the pepper was still floating. The tripe and yellow throats were faintly discernible. San couldn't eat them, because a silver metal chain had bound his body tightly, so he couldn't move, let alone pick the chopsticks. The girl quietly sat at the table, not saying a word. The young girl sat by the table. Silence. If you had used a flying sword to ambush me earlier, I naturally wouldn't have been able to defend myself. But now that you're sitting in front of me, aren't you afraid that I'll counterattack? Do you really think that this sword rope can restrain me? The girl still ignored him. San finally grew serious as he said, "The Green Mountain sect is a major sword sect and the leader of the orthodox cultivation sections. Do you intend to kill me without asking?" The girl finally raised her head, her eyes bright and clear, without any impurities. Looking at such eyes, San felt very relaxed. Then, he felt a slight chill between his eyebrows, as if a drop of rain had fallen there. A small sword hovered in front of him in silence. He did not know that a bloody hole had appeared between his eyebrows. The hole was very small and round, and could even be described as delicate. A thin waterfall of blood gushed out from between his eyebrows and fell into the hot pot. The blood of the disciples of the underworld was also hot, but it was cold compared to the soup in the hot pot. The boiling noodles gradually calmed down. The vitality in his eyes gradually cooled down, leaving behind only some puzzled emotions. Hundreds of gloomy and cold flames drifted to the surroundings of the restaurant along with the awe-inspiring sword will, dispersing as soon as they came into contact with something. Those were the remnants of the soul fires of the underworld disciples. The young girl's expression was slightly cold. Her eyebrows were raised, and the corners of her eyes were also raised. They were like thin willow leaves, and there was a sense of sharpness to them. Very quickly, her brows furrowed, and she seemed to be deep in thought. The small sword flew out of the window and disappeared into the street. Her fingers moved slightly, and the thin chain that bound San turned into a stream of light and fell on her wrist, becoming a silver bracelet. "I'm an outer disciple, and I don't have a sword," she stood up and said to San, who had already died. San's dead body fell on the ground. She pushed the door open and walked out. A burst of exclamations rang out in the restaurant. Diners and tourists ran out of the restaurant in panic. A middle-aged man appeared on the street where the thin fog had yet to disperse. His expression was indifferent, and his face was thin. His eyes were gloomy and cold, and he looked like an immortal. "The demons of the underworld have come to our Aoyama sect to show off. Even death cannot wipe out their crimes." Hearing this, the people could easily guess the identity of this man. The tourists from other counties were startled, and they quickly knelt on the ground, not daring to raise their heads. The townspeople also started praising the celestial master and prostrated themselves on the ground. However, having lived in Cloudy Town for a long time, they had heard a lot about the immortals of the Aoyama sect. Sometimes they could even catch a glimpse of the celestial master, so they came to their senses faster. They felt that what happened today was too unusual. The underworld and the humans had been hostile toward each other for tens of thousands of years, and the hatred between them was unresolvable. However, the two sides hadn't fought each other for many years since the immortal Chunyang of the Aoyama sect joined hands with the emperor and defeated the army led by the underworld master in Ozawa 2,000 years ago, and they even had dealings with each other in private. Even in places like the capital of Zhaoga or the windy Broadsword County, if the devil men of the underworld were captured, they would be sent to the fiend prison unless they were spies. Then, they would look for an opportunity to exchange their members with the underworld or ask for money. Moreover, the Aoyama sect was an otherworldly immortal sect, and they had always acted calmly. How could they be so vicious today? A gentle breeze blew past, dispersing the mist on the street. More than 10 young men gathered in front of the restaurant. Their looks and temperament were outstanding. They were the outer disciples of the Aoyama sect. Paying respects to Mengshi, the young disciples bowed respectfully to the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man called Mengshi said with a serious expression, "Something big is about to happen. Be careful." All the disciples responded in unison. Mengshi said again, "Leave after cleaning up. Don't disturb the world for too long." The young girl walked out of the restaurant. Mengshi looked at her, his expression becoming gentler. "Not bad, Lei." After saying this, a flash of sword light broke through the air, and his figure disappeared. Senior Sister. Senior Sister Zhao. The disciples of the Aoyama sect surrounded the young girl, their faces full of admiration and respect. The young girl named Zhao Leo was only 12 or 13 years old, obviously younger than her peers, but for some reason she was called Senior Sister. When she ordered the crowd to clean up the restaurant and remove all traces to ensure that the soul fire fragment of the devil man of the underworld wouldn't change, no one questioned her, and she had a high prestige. The immortal master is right. 7 days ago, the Tianguang Peak issued a ban of 3,000 miles, but this devil man still dared to stay. He was courting death. A disciple looked at the corpse being carried out and couldn't help but shake his head. "I don't know what he was thinking. It's fine here. I heard that even the senior brothers of Liangwang Peak went to the turbid river to suppress the devil, and the sword light illuminated the Nanhezu. That's nothing. The night before yesterday, the 4 guardians suddenly woke up at the same time, and half of the starlight in the sky was eaten by them." The disciples discussed excitedly. Zhao Leo didn't say anything. Silence, she looked at the gray sky, thinking about something. There were 9 peaks in Aoyama, hidden in the clouds. Tianguang Peak was the ancestral peak, the residence of the sect master. Liangwang Peak was the second peak, and the strongest young disciples of the Aoyama sect all practiced swordsmanship there. When the Aoyama sect encountered something serious, it would activate the formation and issue a ban to the whole continent. No one was allowed to enter or leave within a few miles of the greater Aoyama, and anyone who didn't enter would be killed. The longer the ban was, the more serious the situation was. Back before Taiping Jinren stayed behind closed doors, the Aoyama sect had issued a ban of 400 miles, shocking the world. The Forbidden Order extended 400 miles from the Great Green Mountain, covering 1/5 of Chaotian. In order to comply with the ban issued by the Aoyama sect, the emperor even dispatched an army of tens of thousands to the north overnight to intimidate the Snowy Kingdom and the underworld. Yet, the Aoyama sect had issued a ban of 3,000 miles? What kind of significant event was going to happen? Zhao Leu suddenly narrowed her eyes. It was because the gray sky she had been staring at had suddenly become brighter. The sun was in the middle of the sky, and the clouds and fog had gradually dispersed. The peaks in the distance were intermittently visible, like countless huge swords pointing at the sky. The gazes of the disciples followed Zhao Leu to the peak. The sunlight shone on these young and tender faces, full of admiration and respect. It was as if the Green Mountain sect was going to welcome the most important event in the last 1,000 years. It was like facing a formidable enemy. Chapter 4. Don't panic when we see what kind of changes will occur in the world later. The disciples of the Auyama sect asked the townspeople to go home. The few tourists also returned to the inn. The street was soon emptied. A disciple looked at the corpse on the ground and asked confusedly, "This disciple of the underworld has an ordinary soul fire and weak supernatural power. Why did he dare to stay here?" A disciple answered, "Who knows? Maybe he just wanted to see Uncle Master's ascension. Who wouldn't want to see such a grand scene?" Suddenly, a gust of wind blew, and green leaves fell from the trees by the road. The disciples raised their heads to look at the sky and saw hundreds of sword gleams flying towards the peaks from all over the sky. Behind them, there were more than 10 glowing treasures that filled the sky. The last one was a gigantic lotus that crossed the sky. The Zen breath floated higher than the sky. "Is that the old lady of the Platonist sect? Master of Mercy? The chief of the Mirror sect? That sword Chi soared into the sky, insufferably arrogant. Could it be that person? The senior brothers of Liangwang Peak are back. So is Elder C of the Shangda Peak. The curtain rollers are here too?" The disciples were shocked speechless. If it weren't for today's event, they wouldn't have seen so many important figures at the same time. Zhao Liu didn't pay attention to these things. She carried Insan's corpse and walked out of the town. Master Meng didn't leave the town. Instead, he stood on a tall tree outside the town and looked at the peak with mixed feelings. Grandmaster Jingyang had a very high status, and was the young brother of the immortal Taiping. Even the sect master had to call him young senior master respectfully. It was said that the grand-uncle master's talent was shocking, and he had created countless unimaginable records in the cultivation world. However, he spent most of his time training in the 9th summit and rarely met outsiders. Not many of the senior disciples in the peaks had seen the grand-uncle master's true face, much less him. Today, not only were the sect masters of the major sects here, but many reclusive masters were also here. He didn't expect that the legendary Zen master of the Buddhism sect would also come. It was said that there might be powerful figures from other continents hiding in the depths of the clouds. It was indeed a grand event that hadn't been seen in 1,000 years. What if that sword light came from the sword god or the saber saint? Master Meng was at a loss. Those names were too far away from him. That mountain was even further away from him. As for that martial granduncle, he had only heard some rumors. It was said that after the sect leader inherited the position, when he mentioned this elder who was cultivating in seclusion in the peak, he only said the 3 words young martial uncle, and did not say anything else. There were too many things he did not want to say. He understood why, just like the entire Aoyama sect understood why the sword justice of Shangda Peak never showed any respect when he mentioned this grand uncle master. He would only snort coldly. The little Grand Master was the strongest cultivator in the Aoyama sect, or even the entire continent. However, from the day he stepped into Aoyama, he had been cultivating in the mountains, rarely showing himself in front of others, let alone fighting. He didn't represent the Aoyama sect to participate in the plum meeting, didn't compete with the swordsmen of the imperial court of Zhaoga, didn't compete with the hidden swordsmen of other sects, and didn't participate in the secret bloody battles between the cultivation sects and the elders of the underworld. He wasn't even seen in the 3 battles against the cultivation swordsmen of the Snowy Kingdom. On the long path of cultivation, he had done nothing but cultivation. It was true that only this kind of cultivation practitioner, who had no worldly desires and no emotions, could reach the end of the path of cultivation and reach an unimaginable cultivation state. However, such a cultivation life, no matter how high the Grand Master's cultivation state was, it was meaningless to the disciples of the younger generation. What was the significance to the Aoyama sect? What was the significance to the people in the world? No matter how shocking it was, a legend was just a legend, and it couldn't exist in the real world. So let's go. Looking at the faintly discernible peak in the fog, The corners of his mouth curled up into a bitter smile. When he saw Zhao Lei carrying the corpse of the devil man of the underworld and walking toward the outskirts of the town, the bitterness in his smile disappeared. He was a bit surprised, but also comforted. The whole world was watching that peak, but she didn't look at it. How could her Tao heart be so peaceful at such a young age? She was indeed the talented young girl that the entire Aoyama sect had been watching in secret. Suddenly, the smile on his face disappeared, and he looked at the peak again. Just as he had said, those who were qualified to look at that peak were all looking in that direction at this moment. The clouds and fog between the peaks seemed to be stirred up by an invisible giant hand, rolling violently and flowing out in all directions, gradually revealing the clear blue sky. A few blurry figures deep in the clouds were forced to reveal themselves, bowing toward the Tianguang Peak where the Aoyama sect was located. They seemed calm, but in fact it was rather awkward. In a place further away, two black shadows with cold flames were retreating at high speed. They seemed to be in a sorry state. Master Meng could guess that one of them was the high priest of the underworld, but who was the other person? The Aoyama formation didn't launch an attack. Laughter sounded from the Tianguang Peak, and at the same time, an extremely eerie sword will arose. The sword will swept out in all directions like a wave. A ray of sword light rose from the cliffs, as if it was forced to respond, and floated away. It wasn't until the ray of sword light had retreated 3,000 miles and reached the West Sea that the sword will from the Tianguang Peak gradually subsided. The sect leader has drawn his sword. Master Meng was slightly surprised. There were only a few people in the entire continent who were qualified to make the sect leader of the Aoyama sect use the sword of inherited heaven. That ray of cold light above the West Sea was the sword god's sword? No matter what happened, even if these famous figures appeared one after another, it had no effect on the ninth peak. The lone peak was still as quiet as ever, as if there was no aura at all. Suddenly, the heavens and earth changed color. More than 10 bolts of lightning tore through the blue sky, and dozens of heavenly thunderbolts bombarded the lone peak. The thunderbolts, which contained the might of heaven and earth, were cut into pieces before they could even touch the peak, turning into green smoke. This was because a ray of sword light had appeared from the lone peak. No one knew whether this sword or the sword of inherited heaven was more powerful. Not to mention Master Meng, even those figures 3,000 miles away could not tell. The ray of sword light that appeared on the lone peak did not seem to have any power. It was just a simple sword that casually slashed toward the sky. Yet the heavenly thunderbolts were extinguished upon contact. The sword light continued upward. A soft hiss sounded. An extremely thin crack appeared in the azure sky. Countless rays of light that resembled gold and jade flowed down from that crack, dispersing upon contact with the wind and turning into countless light spots, illuminating the entire continent. Cutting the heavens with one sword? According to the records, when those great cultivators ascended, they all relied on their own cultivation to bitterly resist the heavenly thunderbolts until they passed the test. The heavenly thunderbolts stopped, and the rays of light fell like flowers scattered by a celestial maiden. Only then could the path to heaven be seen. But today, Martial Granduncle Jingyang did not wait for the second round of heavenly thunderbolts and took the initiative to attack. Could it be that he wanted to use his own sword to forcefully cut open a path to heaven? What kind of boldness was this? What kind of confidence was that? Master Meng was extremely shocked. His face was pale and his lips trembled. The owner of that ray of sword light above the West Sea and the experts who were watching the ceremony in the Aoyama sect were also shocked speechless when they saw this scene. On the lone peak, that ray of sword light was still flying toward the sky. The strong winds howled and the heavenly thunderbolts rumbled incessantly. That sword light paid no attention to it and continued to move upward. If this was the final test that heaven and earth gave to the cultivators who were about to ascend, then the response of this ray of sword light could be said to be completely rude. The battle between the might of heaven and earth, and that sword will had long dispersed the clouds and mist between the mountains. For the first time, the 9 peaks of the Aoyama sect appeared in the eyes of the world at the same time. But no one paid any attention to it, because all eyes were on that ray of sword light. That ray of sword light was getting closer and closer to the sky. The crack in the sky was getting bigger and bigger, and the flowing rays of light were getting thicker and thicker, making the world brighter and brighter. Chapter 5. Carrying Insan's corpse, Zhao Lei walked out of the town. Her footsteps were light and quick as she stepped on the green grass. The bright light from the sky cast a long shadow on the ground of her petite body, which was then gradually faded by the brighter light. The most important thing in the whole continent was happening, but she didn't turn around to look. She just watched the shadow in front of her change in thickness, as if it was more interesting than the strange phenomena in heaven and earth. No one noticed her, and naturally, no one noticed that her expression had finally changed. She lifted the corners of her mouth slightly. She was smiling. Cheers gradually rose among the peaks. There seemed to be cheers in the town. As the world became brighter, the cheers became louder and louder, and her smile became brighter and brighter until shallow dimples appeared on her cheeks, which was a little cute. She was really happy but also a little regretful. How nice it would be if she could be in the same generation as a genius like Grandmaster. Whether it was to seek knowledge or to ask for Taoism or anything else, the cheers among the peaks suddenly disappeared. There was no surprise. The silence at the moment represented good wishes. It was like the light that illuminated the world. Of course, there would still be some disappointment in the end. Grand Master Jingyang had ascended. Zhao Lei finally turned around and looked at the sky. Looking at the gradually disappearing crack and the sword light that was almost out of sight, she didn't know why, but she slightly raised her eyebrows. She looked at the corpse in her hand, and her smile gradually disappeared. She was a little confused and uncertain. There was endless moisture in the clouds and mist, which was often accompanied by streams. There was a stream not far from Cloudy Town. The stream carried a thin mist, flowing around high cliffs and low hills. After traveling for dozens of miles, it re-entered the mountain wall of another peak. The stream flowed into the mountain wall for an unknown distance. The channel gradually widened, and the light gradually brightened. There was actually a stone room, and the wall was inlaid with a rare bright jade. The stone room was very simple, with only a stone bed connected to the mountain wall. In front of the bed were 2 rotten cattail hassocks. A young man had his hands behind his back, tilting his head to look at the stone bed. Occasionally, a gust of wind would blow up his white robe. There was a person lying on the stone bed. His entire body was covered in blood, and there were wounds everywhere. Some were narrow, some were wide, some were deep, and some were shallow. It was impossible to tell what kind of weapon had injured him. His clothes were also in tatters, and it was impossible to tell that they were woven from sky-worm silk. The belt was still intact, and there was an extremely faint murderous aura on it. It was actually made from the tendons of the Hell Flood dragon. There was a token tied to it, but it seemed to be carved from ordinary black wood. This person's aura was completely gone, and he had died a long time ago. The strange thing was that his face was always shrouded in a layer of mist that was incomparably deep and serene, making it impossible to see his appearance clearly. The young man stood in front of the stone bed and looked at the man in silence. No one knew what he was thinking. After a long time, he finally spoke. So annoying. His voice was very clean, but a little rough. He spoke very slowly, as if he rarely spoke. The light fell into his eyes. His eyes were like an ocean. They seemed calm and clear, but they were incomparably deep and vast, hiding countless storms and waves. There was confusion, anger, regret, tiredness, and some vicissitudes that did not match his age. A moment later, all the emotions in his eyes disappeared, leaving only calmness. It was like the clouds had disappeared between the 9 peaks, or like the light that fell from the sky had turned into nothingness. I somewhat envy you. You can rest well, but I still have to work for many years. The white-clothed young man said to the dead man on the stone bed. The dead man's belt moved slightly, and the wooden token suddenly disappeared. A cold light left the stone bed and flew around his body, illuminating the stone room. After a moment it stopped in front of him. It was a flying sword, about 2 feet long and as thick as 2 fingers. The blade was as smooth as a mirror. There was nothing special about it, but it gave off an extremely unusual feeling. The white-clothed young man raised his right hand. The flying sword fell by itself, and with a clap, it curled around his wrist. It gradually darkened, and became like an ordinary bracelet. Turning around and walking to the stream, the white-clothed young man suddenly thought of the words that person had said to him. A person could not step into the same river twice. Was it really so? Thinking of this question, he walked into the stream. The stream passed through the belly of the mountain for who knew how many miles, and came out on the other side of the mountain, forming a beautiful waterfall that was more than 10 feet high. The white-clothed young man followed the stream and fell between the cliffs. He was about to walk on the water, but his feet had already stepped through the water and fell into the lake. Only when his feet touched the bottom of the lake did he roughly understand what had happened, and he was somewhat stunned. But he did not seem to know how to express his astonishment, so he looked a little dazed. The slightly cold lake water had no effect on him. He opened his eyes and looked around, and saw a stone at the bottom of the lake. He picked up the stone from the bottom of the lake, and walked along the terrain, getting closer and closer to the water, until he walked out of the lake and onto the shore. With a muffled sound, the ground shook and the water on the shore rippled. That was when he put down the stone in his arms. One could imagine how heavy the stone was. He was soaked and felt somewhat uncomfortable. He wanted to use the sword fire to dry his body, but found that nothing appeared. His dripping hair and wet clothes reminded him that he should make a fire. Then he remembered that he had never made a fire before. He tilted his head and recalled the books he had read many years ago, and repeated in a hoarse voice, "I need hay and branches of different thickness." After confirming that all the water in his left ear had flowed out, he tilted his head to the right and continued to rummage through those distant memories, saying, "If I don't have flint, I need crystal or wood drill." There was a forest on the shore. He walked into the forest and reached out to touch it. The fallen wood rustled down, and soon piled up into a small hill. He picked out the smoothest piece of wood and patted it with a few wadding under the bark. With a thought, the silver bracelet on his wrist turned back into the small sword and hovered above it. The sharp edge of the sword pressed against the wood through the wadding, and began to spin at an unimaginable speed. Soon there were sparks, then smoke, and finally flames. His clothes were placed on the branches, giving off steam. Looking at the thickness of the steam and the speed at which it rose, the young man easily calculated that it would take 3/4 of time for his clothes to be completely dry. He didn't need to think about what he should do during this period of time. All the time had only one purpose for him. He sat down cross-legged, closed his eyes, and began to meditate and cultivate. Chapter 6. After 3/4 of an hour, the young man opened his eyes again. He took off his dry clothes from the branch and put them on. He looked at a mountain in the distance that had disappeared into the clouds again, then turned around and walked downstream. Compared to when he walked out of the lake, his footsteps were much more stable. It was as if he had learned to walk, or perhaps he had gotten used to this body. There was fog on the bank of the stream, but fortunately there were no rocks, so it was not difficult to walk. It did not take long for him to follow the stream out of the mountain and arrive in front of a village. The farmer loosening the soil in the field, the old man pulling a cart of hay, the woman delivering food halfway up the mountain, and the children playing under the big tree at the entrance of the village gradually stopped what they were doing and stood in place. The young man in white walked into the village. The hoe in the farmer's hand fell to the ground and almost hit his own foot. The pipe in the old man's mouth fell out, scalding the donkey pulling the cart and causing it to cry out in pain. The woman tightly held the urn in her arms, but her mouth was even wider than the mouth of the urn. The children suddenly scattered, shouting and running around the village. Among them, there was a little girl who actually began to wail. The young man in white stopped, not understanding what was going on. Dense footsteps sounded, and the people in the mountain village all gathered at the entrance of the village, their faces filled with awe and nervousness. Under the leadership of an old man, the villagers somewhat clumsily knelt on the ground and shouted in unison, "Greetings, Lord Immortal Master." The young man in white's expression did not change. Many years ago, when he occasionally walked in the mortal world, he encountered such a scene many times. But he soon discovered something strange. How could these ordinary villagers recognize his true identity? There was no answer to this question. Since he did not ask, the villagers naturally would not answer. The villagers looked at him with great enthusiasm, but their expressions were also somewhat fearful, as if they were looking at the plaque on the county government office. Being stared at by dozens of such gazes, the young man did not panic. After thinking for a moment, he said, "Greetings, everyone." "Greetings, Immortal Master." It was still the old man who took the lead, and the villagers all responded at once. This back and forth was like some kind of ceremony. The villagers saluted again, and some children who did not respond in time were even spanked by their parents. The children did not cry, but just stared at the young man's face with their eyes wide open, as if they were looking at the world's rarest candy. It was quiet. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, making a rustling sound. None of the villagers dared to speak. They maintained the most respectful posture and stood with a slight bow. After some time, the white-clothed youth suddenly said, "I want to stay here for a year." The old man was shocked and couldn't believe his ears. The villagers were also dumbfounded. What did the Immortal Master mean? Seeing everyone's reaction, the white-clothed youth searched through his memories and recalled something. It seemed that money was a very important thing in the mortal world. He stretched out his hand in front of the old man. There were dozens of golden leaves in his palm. If it were any other time, the villagers would have fainted from the excitement when they saw the golden leaves. However, they only took a glance before looking at the youth in white. In their eyes, the white-clothed youth was much better looking than these golden leaves. Moreover, how could they take these golden leaves? "It's our fortune that Immortal Master is willing to stay," the old man said uneasily. "It's just that the Han village is poor, we really can't find a place for Immortal Master to cultivate in peace." The white-clothed youth didn't know how many things the old man had thought in such a short time, and what the villagers were thinking. Of course, he didn't care. He only knew that the other party should have agreed to his request. His gaze swept through the villagers and finally fell on a little boy. The little boy was a little dark, very sturdy, and had an honest expression. He gave people a very simple and honest feeling. "Where do you live?" The white-clothed youth looked at the little boy and asked. The little boy was stunned and didn't react until his father gave him a heavy slap on the face. "Genwa, quickly lead the way for the Immortal Master," the old man shouted anxiously. In a courtyard on the west side of the mountain village, the room was a little dark. The little boy followed his father's warning. He respectfully bowed to the white-clothed youth and prepared to leave. The white-clothed youth suddenly asked, "Name?" The little boy stopped and said, "Lu Baojian." The white-clothed youth was silent for a while and asked again, "Age?" The boy said, 10 years old. "Baojian doesn't sound good." The white-clothed youth said, "From now on, you will be called 10 years old." The little boy touched the back of his head. From now on, he was Lu Shui. After leaving the courtyard, Lu Shui was immediately surrounded by the villagers. The old man asked with concern, "What orders does the Immortal Master have?" "He asked me my age and gave me a name," Lu Shui said in a muddle-headed manner. The old man was slightly surprised, but the little boy's parents were overjoyed and kept rubbing their hands. Lu Shui didn't like the new name and said with grievance, "How can there be such a strange name?" The father raised his hand and was about to hit him, but he suddenly remembered the immortal master in the house and forced himself to hold back. The old man scolded, "The immortal master bestowing a name is a great blessing. Ordinary people can't even beg for it. Don't talk nonsense." Lu Shui suddenly remembered the last few words he said in the house and quickly said, "But he said he wasn't the immortal master." The villagers didn't understand. They thought if that person wasn't the immortal master, who else could he be? "I think he looks a bit like an idiot," Lu Shui said honestly. "He wanted me to teach him." The old man hesitated and asked, "What, did the immortal master want you to teach him?" Lu Shui said, "Make the bed, wash the clothes, cook the meals, chop the firewood and farm." "Yes, that's it. I didn't remember a word wrong." The villagers were very surprised. They thought if he didn't even know how to do these things, could it be that the person in the house isn't the immortal master, but is really an idiot? The old man laughed and said, "In the greater Aoyama, the immortal master has his own sword boys to serve him. He drinks nectar and eats immortal fruit. Why would he do these things?" In the following days, the immortal master living in the Lu family became the center of attention and discussion in the small mountain village. The villagers naturally accepted the old man's words and firmly believed in the immortal master's identity. The only thing they didn't understand was why the immortal master didn't return to the greater Aoyama, but stayed in this small mountain village. Why did the little fellow from the Lu family, who had accumulated 8 generations of good fortune, teach him these things? Lu Shui, who was envied and even envied by the villagers, didn't understand why someone couldn't do such simple things. That night, he taught the other how to make the bed because the other needed to sleep. The next morning, he taught the other how to fold the quilt. Then he realized that the other person had never done these things before. When he found out that the other person didn't know how to do these things, he was really dumbfounded. When you pour water, don't pour out the rice. Don't chop the firewood too thin, it won't be able to burn. Don't want the fish scales, don't want the fish gills, and don't want the black. Cut it on the left, cut it on the right. Don't cut it, and the straw rain cape will come out. Yes, yes, yes. That's not sweet potato, it's cold melon. Put it down quickly, Mom hates that. Don't cut it too deep. In the past, Lu Shui had read in the books that people couldn't tell the difference between 5 grains and 4 limbs. He didn't believe that there were such people in the world. Until he met the young man in white. But 9 days later, he started to doubt his thoughts again. Because the young man in white only used 9 days to learn everything he taught. On the first day, the young man in white learned the simplest ways to make a bed, cut firewood, and boil water. On the second day, the young man in white learned some more complicated housework. The Lu family's courtyard was clean and bright, as if it had been reborn. On the third day, the young man in white started to cook. After a few glances, he learned how to kill chickens, cut fish, cut onions, and peel garlic. The 4th day, the 5th day, the 6th day, on the 9th day, the sun rose as usual. The young man in white chopped some bamboo and made a deck chair. His craftsmanship was even better than the old bamboo craftsman's. Now, the young man in white could pull the straw rain cucumber up to 2 feet long, and each piece was of the same thickness. As for the firewood, it was indescribably beautiful. It was the same stream water, the same rice, the same potato chips, and the same stove and iron pot. But the rice cooked by the young man in white was more delicious than any rice that Lu Shui had ever eaten. The young man in white even rebuilt the walls of the courtyard. The eaves that had been in disrepair for a long time were neatly mended, as if they were new. Lu Shui found it hard to doubt the young man's identity. Besides, who else could do such a thing? And he didn't see the young man in white wash his clothes. He didn't understand why the young man in white was still as white as the best rice after doing so much. Chapter 7. The green seedlings stretched their waists, and the distance between each seedling was exactly the same. It was perfect. No matter from which angle, the seedlings formed a straight line. Even the shadow of the water was the same. Even the best farmer in the village couldn't do this. Seeing this, Lu Shui couldn't close his mouth for a long time. The breeze blew, and the seedlings moved up and down. It was beautiful. The young man in white stood on the ridge and nodded slightly. He was satisfied with his method. He turned around and walked back. He lay down on the bamboo chair and closed his eyes. Lu Shui looked at the sky and said, "Young master, do you want to chop wood next?" Because the young man in white didn't admit that he was an immortal master, the villagers decided to call him young master after a discussion. "Let's stop here," the young man in white said with his eyes closed. Lu Shui didn't understand what he meant and asked, "Or do you want to cook first?" The young man in white ignored him. Lu Shui finally understood what he meant, but he didn't understand why he changed his mind so quickly. "I just want to learn, but I don't like it," the young man in white said. "Even if turning into a mortal is reasonable, it's not suitable for me." Lu Shui didn't understand, so he asked, "Why?" The young man in white said, "Because I'm lazy and not good at it." Lu Shui was a bit excited and asked, "Then what are you good at, young master?" According to the rumors in the village, the immortal masters in Aoyama were immortals who could attract thunder with a wave of their hands and fly swords into the sky. The young man in white said, "Cut." Everything in the world had a weak point. What he was best at was finding those weak points and cutting them. For example, magic weapons, mountains, or something else. Lu Shui didn't expect to hear such an answer. He was a bit disappointed and scratched his head. "No wonder you can cut vegetables so well." The wind blew and a leaf floated down. The cut was very smooth, as if it was cut by a real sword. A cicada chirped. This should be the first cicada chirping in the village this year. The young man in white opened his eyes and looked at the mountains hidden in the clouds. Lu Shui picked up the fallen leaf, looked at his profile, and asked, "Young master, what is your name?" The youth in white was quiet for a while, then said, "Jingjiu." "Jingjiu? Well, ninth. Well, as in well water does not interfere with river water, and jiu as in 9 out of 8 out of 9 things that don't go one's way? You've read books. There used to be a teacher in the village, but he left last year. I heard that he wanted to go to the county to take the examination. I've read it too. Ask me if you don't understand." "Thank you, young master." "Yes." Lu Shui looked at the young man in white. He had seen this face for 9 days and had developed a resistance to it. However, he still found it a little dazzling and rubbed his eyes subconsciously. "Are you in a bad mood?" The white-clothed youth looked at the distant peaks shrouded in mist and was silent for a long time. Suddenly he said, "It's hard not to get bored doing the same thing over and over again." Lu Shui thought for a moment and said, "If that matter is about eating meat." A year passed quickly and it was late spring again. The villagers were divided into 2 groups about the young man in white who called himself Jingjiu. One group insisted that he was an immortal master from Aoyama, and the other group believed that he was not an immortal master, but a young master of a noble family from the prefectural city, or even the capital Zhaoga city. However, the 2 groups had the same opinion. They had never seen such a lazy person. In this year, the villagers liked to hang around the Lu family's house. No matter who Jingjiu was, they always liked to see him. But no matter when they went there, they would see Jingjiu sleeping. If it was sunny, he would sleep on the bamboo chair in the yard. If it was gloomy, he would sleep on the bed in the house. If it was too hot, he would move the bamboo chair to the tree by the pond. If it was snowing, he would move the bamboo chair back, but he would leave the window open. After the first 9 days, no one saw Jingjiu do even the simplest housework. Now Lu Shui helped him make the bed, put on his clothes and eat. Even the bamboo chair he slept in was moved by Lu Shui. However, the villagers still respected Jingjiu from the bottom of their hearts. When the children in the village were reading, he would occasionally give them some advice. According to the children, the young immortal master was more than 300 times more knowledgeable than the previous teacher. The most important thing was that Jingjiu was very rich and very willing to spend money. Although in the beginning, the villagers didn't dare to ask for his money. The repair of the village's ancestral hall and immortal temple was all done with his money. Now, more than half of the new road leading from the mountain village to the county town had been repaired. How could the villagers not be grateful and respectful to him? Young master, be careful when you rest. Be careful not to fall into the pond again. Lu Shui carried the branch he picked up from the mountain and looked at Jingjiu, who was lying on the bamboo chair. He was a little worried. This kind of thing had happened once, and he was scolded by his father for not serving the immortal master well. Jingjiu laid on the bamboo chair and made a sound of agreement. It was unknown whether it was in response to his words or because it was too comfortable to rest under the shade of the tree. It should be the latter. His slender fingers lightly tapped on the bamboo chair. The rhythm was very messy and without any pattern, giving people a feeling of laziness. Lu Shui hesitated for a while and put down the branch on his back. He sat down against the big tree, hugged his knees, and stared at the bamboo chair, not daring to relax for a moment. He was now 11 years old, but he was still called Shui. Jingjiu didn't seem to have any intention of changing his name. In his opinion, it should be because his young master was too lazy. No matter what his name was, he was still honest and trustworthy. Since he had promised his father to take good care of his young master, he must do it. Moreover, the sound of Jingjiu tapping on the chair was very interesting. He didn't know how to describe it, but he felt that his heart was getting calmer and calmer. The mountain breeze caressed the surface of the water, and the sunlight was getting dimmer. The night was getting darker and darker. The last 2 breaths were taken too early. Lu Shui was a little surprised to hear this, and then he became sober and said, "Got it." Jingjiu opened his eyes and looked at the pond. The night breeze disappeared without a trace, and the surface of the water was as calm as a mirror. Looking at the face on the water, he didn't speak for a long time. This face was very beautiful. This face was perfect. If the eyebrows and eyes were picturesque, the painter must be the most outstanding one in thousands of years. Even in the cultivation world, where there were countless handsome men and beautiful women, he had never seen such a beautiful face. The starlight fell on this face and the surface of the water, and the light flickered, making this face look dreamlike. This was not the first time he had seen this face of his. When he saw this face by the pond, he finally understood why the villagers had such a reaction on the first day he arrived in the mountain village, and why they were so determined to believe that he was an immortal master. No one would be dissatisfied with such a face, even if he was Jingjiu. But he felt something was a little strange. Looking at himself on the surface of the water, he raised his hand and touched his ears. It was a pair of protruding ears which looked round. Interestingly, they didn't look ugly with this face, but made it look a little cute. He understood why, but he was still a little unaccustomed to it. The night breeze rose again, blowing away the perfect face on the surface of the water, and also blowing away his thoughts. Everything was like a dream, as if it was said by junior sister Lian in Shuiyu Nunnery. Jingjiu lay back on the bamboo chair and wanted to drink water, but found that the kettle was in front of the chair, and he needed to sit up again, so he glanced at Lu Shui. Lu Shui was squatting under the tree, playing with jumping green insects with a grass root. Feeling the gaze on him, he raised his head and realized what was going on. He sighed, walked to the bamboo chair, picked up the kettle, and handed it to Jingjiu. Jingjiu drank a bowl of water and closed his eyes again. Lu Shui didn't leave. He squatted down next to the bamboo chair, supported his chin with his hand, and looked at Jingju's face in a daze, wondering why it was so good-looking. He had seen too much, so he was different from other villagers. He knew that this face had actually changed in the past year. It wasn't the eyebrows, but the temperament? The young master wasn't as dull as he was in the beginning. His eyes were much more lively, and in fact, he was much more talkative than before. Jingju closed his eyes, and after 3 breaths, he opened them again. Lu Shisui was somewhat surprised. In the past year, the young master had never opened his eyes so quickly, no matter if he was sleeping soundly, resting, or pretending to sleep. "What are you doing?" Jingju looked at the stars in the night sky and said, "I'm deducing the next 3 years." Lu Shisui scratched his head, wondering what he was doing sleeping every day. Jingju seemed to know what he was thinking and said, "I'm deducing the next 3,000 years." Lu Shisui opened his eyes wide and said, 3,000 years? Jingju asked, "If you were to rack your brains, exhaust your mind, and spend countless hours writing an excellent essay, thinking that you would never be able to write such an excellent essay again in your life, but in the end the manuscript accidentally fell into a stove and was burned to ashes, what would you think?" Lu Shisui was taken aback for a moment before he reacted. He placed his right hand on his chest and said, "I don't dare to think about it. Just thinking about it makes my heart ache." "It's not pain, it's pain." Jingju was silent for a while and then said, "It's very painful." That kind of pain could not be understood by those who had not experienced it themselves. It was so painful that they wished they were dead. But after learning from the painful experience, what else could they do but write that essay again? Lu Shisui said sympathetically, "That person can only write again." Jingju said, "Yes, what else can they do but write again?" Lu Shisui thought of something and said worriedly, "But what if they can't remember the wonderful words in the original essay, and those exquisite allusions? It's not important if they can't remember. How can those words and allusions be truly wonderful?" Jingju looked at the peaks in the night fog and said, "Write it again, and it will certainly be an even better and more beautiful essay." Lu Shisui thought about it, but he didn't know if this was reasonable. Thinking of the previous conversation, he asked curiously, "Young master, what have you deduced? What about the rain in the next 3 years?" Jingju's gaze fell on a nearby forest, and he said, "I can only calculate that the time has come. It was tonight." The night breeze rose, and a middle-aged cultivator with a refined air floated down to the ground, carrying a long sword on his back. Lu Shisui was startled, and hid behind the bamboo chair. The middle-aged cultivator's gaze fell on Jingju, and he raised his straight eyebrows in surprise. Chapter 8. The middle-aged cultivator was called Master Lu. He came from the 3rd peak of Aoyama, Shanghai Peak, and was now in the state of inherited will. Because he had failed to break through to the state of undefeated twice, he had to temporarily stop. Now he was the master of the South Pine Pavilion, responsible for the training of the new disciples. With his status, he didn't need to personally recruit disciples. But in recent years, the disciples at the South Pine Pavilion had been very ordinary, far inferior to other places, which put a lot of pressure on him. Now he didn't expect to do anything great, only to bring up a few good disciples, or to be rewarded with magic pills by the masters, and break through to the state of undefeated one last time. When he heard the news from somewhere in the 9 peaks that this remote mountain village was worth a visit, he quickly came. He hid in the green trees, observing the 10-year-old boy, and found that the news was correct. Even from a distance, he could feel that the boy was a good talent. When he used his piercing discernment to scan, he was even more surprised. The boy was a natural Dao quality. Such a good talent, not to mention the surrounding areas of Aoyama, even in the prosperous counties, or even Zhaoga City, it would take several years for one to appear. Master Lu didn't care if he scared the child, and directly appeared in the night. But before he could say anything, his attention was attracted by another matter. The little boy was frightened and hid behind a white-clothed youth. The reason why he was alarmed was that when he was observing the boy from a distance, he didn't notice the presence of this youth. The youth was sitting on a deck chair by the pool. At first, his piercing discernment fell on the youth in white, but he found that the youth was just a mortal who had never cultivated, and there was no Tao quality in his body, which surprised him. When his gaze fell on the face of the youth in white, he was even more surprised. He had never seen such a beautiful youth in the cultivation world for many years. Not to mention the disciples of the aristocratic families in Jiaoga City, even the young sisters on Qingrong Peak and the famous and beautiful female disciples of Shui Yu Nunnery couldn't be compared to him. The cultivation world had always believed in one principle: the extreme is extraordinary. Whether it was tall or short, fat or thin, or any other external appearance, as long as it was special enough, there must be something unusual about the person. To put it simply, there must be a demon in the extreme. As for the word beauty, it had always been highly esteemed by cultivators. Regardless of whether it was the pine trees in the cliffs or the flying swords that were as bright as light, as long as they were extremely beautiful, they must have extraordinary inner qualities. Looking at the beautiful face of the white-robed youth, how could Master Lu not be tempted? He strengthened his sword discernment and checked again, only to find that his Taoist heart was still immature, not to mention the existence of the Taoist seed. The white-robed youth was much older than the boy, but his Tao heart was far inferior. Naturally, his talent and aptitude were far inferior. Master Lu felt a little regretful. He no longer looked at the young man and turned to Lu Shui. "Do you know who I am?" Lu Shui was frightened by the sudden appearance of this stranger. He didn't dare to show his face at all. When he heard the question, he didn't dare to speak. He just tightly grabbed onto Jingjiu's sleeve. Jingjiu could tell from the middle-aged cultivator's clothes and the way he carried the sword on his back that he should be a disciple of the third generation. His state was still far from the undefeated state, but Jingjiu did not know his name. This was a very natural thing to do. The Aoyama sect had thousands of inner and outer sect disciples. Except for the old men of Shanghai Peak and the women of Shilai Peak, no one could recognize all of them. "It's nothing," Jingjiu said. For some reason, when he heard this, Lu Shui felt a lot more at ease. But he was still a little nervous. He stood up and looked at the middle-aged cultivator, saying with a trembling voice, "Could it be that you are?" Master Lu said with a gentle expression, "Yes, I am a Taoist cultivator of Aoyama. I am also what you call an immortal master." Hearing the two words, immortal master, Lu Shui subconsciously glanced at Jingjiu. Master Lu thought he was too nervous. He smiled and said, "You can call me Master Lu." Lu Shui said uneasily, "Master Lu, what are you doing here?" "I came to ask you, are you willing to cultivate the great path and seek immortality?" Hearing this, Jingjiu felt a little emotional. After so many years, it was still the same sentence, not even a word had changed. Lu Shui stood there in a daze for a long time before he came to his senses. He stammered, "Of course. I am willing, but..." The usually inconspicuous village youth was taken away by an immortal master of Aoyama. This was the most beautiful story that had been passed down in the village for generations. He grew up listening to these stories. He was completely dumbfounded and had no intention of objecting. It was just like what he said, but... He looked at the small courtyard, hesitation and struggle on his young face. Master Lu was not angry. Instead, he felt even more comforted. Although cultivation is not a matter of the mortal world, we are not those monks. We can also participate in the mortal world. Naturally, we will not sever the bonds of heaven. Lu Shui said uneasily, "Really?" Master Lu smiled and said, "I will explain it to your parents later. In the future, you will also be given time to return to your hometown to visit your relative. If you cannot enter the inner sect in the future, you will need to manage the secular affairs of the sect. You will not be short of money and you can go home often. If you want to take care of the village, it will be as easy as lifting a finger, but I don't think you will have such an opportunity. It was obvious that he thought very highly of Lu Shirsui's talent and aptitude. He firmly believed in it. Lu Shirsui looked at Jingjiu. Master Lu was a little surprised. Jingjiu stood up and said, "If you want to go, then go." Lu Shirsui's face lit up with joy. "Yes, young master." Master Lu's surprise turned into astonishment. How could there be such a beautiful young master in such a remote mountain village? He looked at Jingjiu and suddenly said, "What about you? Are you willing to cultivate the great path with me and seek immortality?" Separated by a wall, the Lu couple's conversation and crying could be heard from time to time. But they remembered the celestial master's warning and did not dare to disturb the village, so they kept their voices very low. Jingjiu sat by the window, looking at the stars in the night sky. He was silent, thinking about something. That guy called Master Lu would come tomorrow morning to take Lu Shirsui and him to Oyama sect. Lu Shirsui was packing his luggage. He was a very diligent child, but this was the first time he had done something like packing his luggage. But that was not the reason for the confusion on his little face. It was because he had received too much of a mental shock and had not yet fully recovered. Perhaps it was because of this that he did not think of the fact that Jingjiu was not the celestial master. "Is this enough?" The little boy still stuttered. "Does the celestial master not need time to look at my moral character?" Jingjiu looked at the starry sky outside the window and said, "Temperament." Lu Shirsui said, "That's right, that's the word." Jingjiu said, "This kind of thing only depends on talent. Temperament changes with time. How can you look at it? Besides, do you really think that the benevolent are invincible?" Lu Shirsui scratched his head and said, "Isn't that so? That's what the books say." Jingjiu did not turn around and said, "Of course not. Only the invincible are invincible." Lu Shirsui didn't understand what Jingjiu meant. Looking at his back, he suddenly felt a sense of loneliness. Early in the morning, the sky was just beginning to brighten. The morning sun was still far away on the other side of the mountain peak. Master Lu had arrived. The Lu couple sent Lu Shirsui to the front of the courtyard, silently wiping away their tears. They were somewhat sad, but more than that, they were happy. Footsteps sounded. Jingjiu walked out of the house, his white clothes fluttering in the morning wind. His hands were empty, and he did not bring anything with him. Seeing this scene, the Lu couple could not help but think of a year ago when he walked to the entrance of the village. He seemed to be like this. Mother Lu glanced at Father Lu, wanting to say something but hesitating. Father Lu gave her a warning look and said respectfully, "Young master, do you want to bring something useful on the road? Shirsui can carry it." Jingjiu ignored him and walked out of the courtyard with his hands behind his back. Outside the courtyard, Master Lu watched this scene with a slight frown. No one knew that in the water jar behind the wing room, there was half a light blue pill that was slowly melting until it disappeared in the water and could no longer be seen. Master Lu led Jingjiu and Lu Shirsui into the morning mist and soon disappeared. Father Lu and Mother Lu wiped their tears and walked back to the courtyard. Suddenly, they did not know what to do. After standing in a daze for a while, they got up and began to clean the courtyard and boil water for cooking. Whether it was cooking porridge or brewing coarse tea, they used the water in the jar. Only then did Mother Lu realize that something was missing in the room. The bamboo chair was gone. For some reason, Master Lu did not choose to fly back to Oyama sect on his sword. Instead, he chose to walk. Of course, Lu Shirsui did not think of this, because he had never thought that anyone in the world could fly on a sword. But Jingzhu knew very well that this third-generation disciple of Aoyama sect was now at the consummate stage of inherited will. Logically speaking, he should be able to fly on a sword easily, even if he had to carry 2 people. So why did he insist on walking? Was he worried that other cultivators would see the traces of the flying sword and cause trouble? Jingzhu did not understand. In his opinion, although the Aoyama sect was getting worse with each generation, it should not be to such an extent. The mountain village was at most 100 miles away from the main gate of Aoyama sect. If a disciple of Aoyama sect needed to be so cautious in such a place, it would be completely cowardly. Master Lu did not know what Jingzhu was thinking. He led the 2 youths, one big and one small, towards the misty peaks, silent and low-key. On the 3rd day, after passing through a thick layer of fog, the view suddenly became clear. Countless green peaks appeared in front of them. Some were elegant, some were steep, some had rock walls as smooth as a mirror, completely impossible to climb, but there were signs of human habitation at the peak. The legendary 9 peaks of Aoyama were among them? Lu Shui exclaimed repeatedly, but Jingzhu did not even look at them. The 3 of them followed the bluestone-paved mountain path to the peak. Not long after, they saw a stone gate. The stone gate was simple in style, covered with moss, and had an ancient feel to it. On the horizontal plaque, the words South Pine Pavilion could be vaguely seen. This was the South Mountain Gate of Aoyama sect. Seeing this mountain gate, Master Lu's face broke into a smile, and he was obviously much more relaxed. The mountain gate was secluded, and the birds in the dense forest were not annoying. Chapter 9. Master Lu walked forward and knocked on the table. The gray-robed man woke up and rubbed his sore eyes. He was very happy to see Master Lu, but he was shocked to see the wet mud on his front and shoes. Senior brother Lu, what happened? Just like a child who learned to walk would never think of crawling again. Who would be willing to walk after learning to ride a sword and fly? Master Lu said, I just want to be careful. What if the 3 sides find out and come to snatch him? The gray-robed man said, We're all from the same sect, it's not necessary. Master Lu said, What if other sects come to snatch him? The gray-robed man laughed. Senior brother, you're exaggerating. I'd like to see what kind of genius you've found to make you so nervous. Master Lu signaled Jingzhu and Lu Shui to come forward and said, This is our sect's South Gate registered Immortal Master Ming Guoxing. Before entering the inner gate, you must call him Uncle Master. Lu Shui hurriedly shouted, Uncle Master Ming. Seeing Jingzhu, Master Lu was startled for a moment before coming to his senses. He praised, What a beautiful child carved from ice and jade. Senior brother Lu, you've really had an extraordinary encounter today. Whether or not he's just an empty shell is another matter. I picked the small one. Master Lu sighed and did not hide his words from Jingzhu. After only 3 days on the road, his impression of Jingzhu had worsened and he even regretted it. He had never seen such a lazy person. Of course, what really annoyed him was that Lu Shui, a genius in his eyes, was being ordered around like that. Uncle Master Ming looked at Lu Shui and saw that the child's breath was fresh and his eyes steady. He nodded and thought that he was indeed not bad. When he used his piercing discernment to take a look, he was so shocked that his voice trembled. Natural Taoist quality? Master Lu smiled and said, That's right. Ming Guoxing shouted anxiously, Then what are you waiting for? Come in quickly. Master Lu led Jingzhu and Lu Shui into the stone door. Ming Guoxing stroked his chest and smiled at him. He was finally relieved. Once he entered the mountain gate, he would be a disciple of the Aoyama sect, and no one would be able to snatch him away. To say nothing of those cultivation sects, even the people from Zhaoga City couldn't do anything. Even the old ones and the curtain rollers didn't dare set foot in this place. 4 countless years. Who dared to be presumptuous in Aoyama sect? Ming Guoxing picked up the brush, dipped it in the inkstone, and opened the book. He looked at Lu Shui and asked, "Name?" Lu Shui answered nervously, "Lu Shui." Mingguishing was slightly startled and said, "Name, not age." Lu Shui widened his eyes and said, "This is my name, can't I?" At first, he was not satisfied with the name, but now he was used to it and even liked it. "Not to mention Shui, even if you want to call me Wan Sui, you can," Mingguishing said with a smile. After registering Lu Shui's information, he looked at Jing Jiu and asked, "What about you?" Though he was mentally prepared, he still couldn't help but squint his eyes and click his tongue in his mind when he saw that unbelievably beautiful face. "Jing Jiu, from Zhaoga City," the youth answered casually while looking at a lonely peak in the distance. Mingguishing was so excited that he didn't mind his rudeness. He even gave him a few words of encouragement, and then he turned to Lu Shui, ready to have a conversation with this person with natural Tao quality. Unexpectedly, Lu Shui didn't even look at him and walked toward the mountain gate, because Jing Jiu had already started to move. On the mountain path, the youth in white walked in the front, and the young boy followed behind with his luggage. Seeing this, Mingguishing was quite surprised, asking, "What's going on?" "They are master and servant." Master Lu thought of what his father told him that night, furrowing his brows. A person with natural Tao quality is actually a servant? Mingguishing was extremely shocked. He looked at Master Lu and said, "No matter what their relationship was in the past, once they enter the mountain gate, the matters of the mortal world are no longer meaningful. Didn't you tell them?" Master Lu felt somewhat helpless. On the first day, he had clearly explained this matter. Jingju didn't say anything, but Lu Shui didn't listen no matter what he said. The clouds and mist had long dispersed, but the wind was moist enough. The mountain path was also very smooth, and walking on it was quite comfortable. Lu Shui looked around at the surrounding cliffs, his little face full of curiosity, feeling nervous and excited. Perhaps influenced by him, or perhaps evoked memories from a long time ago, Jingju's gaze lingered on the surrounding scenery a little longer. With this kind of mood, he quickly walked more than 10 miles of mountain path, and came to a cliff plateau halfway up the mountain. There were towering trees everywhere on the cliff, and dozens of thatched huts were scattered among them. The clouds and mist rose again, and the thatched huts were faintly discernible. Looking closely, one could see that each hut was separated by a courtyard wall. When they came to the cliff plateau, there were more and more paths. Lu Shui didn't know where to go, so he looked at Jingjiu. There was the sound of water behind the cliff, clear and pleasant to the ear. It should be a stream of spring water. Another sound of music gradually rose, matching the sound of the water, making it even more faintly discernible. Jingjiu walked in that direction, and Lu Shui hurried to keep up. Following the sound, the two walked past the green trees and saw a building vaguely in the mist. The sun suddenly fell, dispersing the mist, and the true appearance of the building was revealed. It was a building with black eaves and green walls, giving off a rather austere feeling. This was the training hall of the South Pine Pavilion of the Aoyama sect, where new disciples would live and study for a long time. Dozens of young boys and girls stood on the flat ground in front of the training hall, all wearing the same style of green clothes. Master Lu stood on the stone steps and said, "We're waiting for the two of you. Hurry up and get in line." Lu Shui was very surprised and asked Jingjiu, "Young master, how did the immortal master get here? I didn't see him pass us on the way." After entering the mountain gate, there was no need to worry about being exposed and being robbed by other sections. Master Lu only needed to fly on his flying sword and arrive in a moment. Jingjiu understood this, but Lu Shui had no idea. Hearing Master Lu's words, dozens of disciples turned to look at Jingjiu and Lu Shui, their faces full of curiosity. In front of the training hall, there was an atmosphere of "finally here." These disciples came from all over the continent and had been at the South Pine Pavilion for some time, but they hadn't been taught mystical methods and swordsmanship. They had been waiting anxiously for a long time. It was said that the immortal master was waiting for a disciple. For a disciple to make so many people wait and waste time, they naturally knew that the immortal master valued him very much. These disciples were all excellent talents personally selected by the immortal master of the Aoyama sect, and they were confident that they would be able to set foot on the path to heaven. In the face of such a situation, they were naturally curious about the new disciple, and at the same time, it was inevitable that they would have some resistance. They were all outer disciples who had just entered the Aoyama sect, and they couldn't detect Lu Shisui's talent through the sword discernment. Their eyes naturally fell on Jingjiu, who was in front of them. A burst of uncontrollable low exclamations rang out in the crowd, and then became excited discussions, buzzing like the sound of a swarm of bees. Why is this person so good-looking? How did he get that face? His bearing is also extraordinary. Maybe he's a noble from Zhaoga. Especially those female disciples, looking at that handsome face, for some reason, they felt a little hot. They turned around and raised their hands to gently fan their cheek. A male disciple suddenly said, "Don't you think his ears are very strange?" Hearing this, the crowd looked over and realized that the young man in white had a pair of prominent ears, looking so cute. A young girl looked at Jingjiu and said in an infatuated manner, "Master Lu coughed twice." The youths who were willing to enter the mountain to cultivate were naturally dedicated to Tao. With the reminder of their master, they quietly guarded their Tao hearts, no longer looking at Jingjiu, and no longer discussing. It became very quiet in front of the training hall. Under the reminder of Master Lu's gaze, Jingjiu and Lu Shisui walked to the back of the group and stood there. "Here is the rudimentary formula, you must study it well." Master Lu waved his sleeve lightly, and dozens of thin books flew out of the training hall, scattering like fallen leaves, landing accurately in the hands of each disciple. This scene was really amazing, and both Lu Shisui and the young disciples were amazed. There are many cultivators in the world, and each sect's methods are different. The division of states is different, but there is no difference in essence. What you are learning now is the method of the initial state. Master Lu motioned for the disciples to open the thin book, and said, "The great Tao of our Aoyama sect is simple, and the initial state is only divided into two stages. The first is propriety." Finally, hearing the real cultivation method, the young disciples' expressions became extremely serious, their eyes looking at the words in the book, not missing a single word from their master. What is propriety? The Nanhua Taoist canon says, "The body protects the spirit, each has its own propriety, and that is called nature." What you need to do is to familiarize yourself with the rudimentary method, strengthen your body, temper your will, and straighten your bearing. Only then will you be able to connect the two, and have a beginning and end. Return from the outside to the inside, and when the propriety state is perfected, the Tao seed in your body will be stable enough to endure the chaos of the heart, grow strong, and enter the second state of spiritual stability. Hearing this, some of the disciples raised their heads, their faces full of hope and yearning. What is spiritual stability? The Confucian scholar says, "Hold the spirit in stillness and the form will straighten itself." This stage can be said to be the extension of the propriety state, and also the first leap for a cultivator, because at this stage, the cultivator's will become incomparably firm, and they will naturally be able to sense the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. The Tao seed will gradually grow, the meridians will gradually grow, and they will be able to absorb the spiritual qi of heaven and earth, turning it into Zhen Yuan. This is using the spirit of heaven to nourish the spirit of man, and when the spirit ocean is full, it can be said to be the initial stage of the state. As for how perfect it is, it depends on your sword's resolve. Master Lu's voice was not loud, but it fell clearly on the ears of every disciple. The sun had already risen to the middle of the sky, and the clouds had long dispersed. The light was blazing, and it was rather hot. But none of the disciples complained about the heat, and they listened attentively to the immortal master's teachings, as if they could not even feel it. A young disciple from Lelong County was fascinated by the states that the immortal master was talking about, when he suddenly heard some noises coming from beside him. He turned his head and saw the scene, and he could not help but be stunned. Lu Shui was pouring tea for Jingjiu. The tea that was poured out of the teapot had long since cooled down, and there was no steam coming out. But the sound of the tea falling into the teacup was still as clear as spring water. Jingjiu took the teacup, drank it all, and handed it back. Lu Shui put away the teapot and teacup, took out a round fan from his bag, and began to fan Jingjiu. Chapter 10. The sound of tea and the wind entered their ears. More disciples noticed what was going on behind them, and they couldn't help but be stunned. Master Lu looked over there and raised his eyebrows, a little displeased. He flicked his right finger behind his back. Clang! An extremely cold sound of sword resounded in front of the hall. The disciples' hearts trembled, and they immediately came to their senses and turned around. It was extremely quiet on the cliff plateau, and even the chirping of birds in the distant trees had disappeared. Master Lu's eyes moved among the disciples, lingering on Jingjiu and Lu Shui for a little longer, and finally fell on the mountains in the distance. Focus. I don't care how talented you are, but you must strive to break through the spirit state in 3 months. Only then can you have a chance to reach the spiritual stability state in 3 years, and then have the opportunity to be recruited into the inner sect and become a real disciple of Aoyama. Our sect practices the right way of the heaven sword, which emphasizes on the word pleasure. It's not difficult to cultivate at the beginning. Even the most stupid person can break through the realm one day as long as he is willing to spend time and energy. But how many thousands of miles does the great way lead to heaven? The further you go, the harder it gets. The peak is steep and dangerous, and the last few thousand feet is as difficult as climbing up to heaven. So if you can't enter the inner sect in 3 years, then don't take this great way to heaven. He was a little sentimental. These words were said for these disciples, and they were also his real experience. He had reached the inherited will state and could fly freely on the sword, killing people in 10 steps without staining his clothes with blood. For the common people, he was like a sword fairy, and in the mansions of the imperial court in Zhaoga City, he would be worshipped. However, in Aoyama sect, he couldn't enter the undefeated state, and his life was limited. He had no hope of breaking through the next few big states, so naturally he couldn't become the focus of the sect. Just like now, he could only teach these outer disciples who knew nothing at the South Pine Pavilion. Although it was also very important for the sect, but a childish voice pulled Master Lu out of his sentiments. Immortal Master, if our cultivation goes well, will we have the opportunity to participate in the inherited sword competition in 3 years? The young disciple who spoke had somehow heard some news about the Aoyama sect. He knew that the inherited sword competition was the most important test for the young disciples. Master Lu was slightly taken aback. Then, he smiled and did not answer the question. In his opinion, this young disciple's question was too naive. Gradually, there were sounds of discussion and low laughter. Through his companion's explanation, the young disciple knew that only disciples who had completed the realm of perfect conservation were qualified to participate in the inherited sword competition. After propriety was spirit concentration, which was the initial state. After that was knowledge comprehension, and then mental preservation. The outer disciples who had just entered the mountain gate were still 4 levels away from the perfect preservation state. 2 years to achieve the perfect preservation state? A disciple mocked, "Do you think you're a genius like Senior Sister Zhao? I hope you can make it in time for 12th moon." A voice resounded, and it shocked everyone. But no one dared to laugh at him, because the person who spoke was Master Lu. However, Master Lu was not talking to the disciple who wanted to participate in the inherited sword competition. Following Master Lu's line of sight, the disciples looked at the back of the line and fixed their eyes on one person. Lu Shui was stunned for a while before he came to his senses. He pointed at himself and asked, "Are you talking about me?" Master Lu said, "Yes. I hope you can be another surprise for the 9 peaks of Aoyama." The young outer disciples dispersed. Some were reading the entry-level incantations in their hands, and some were staring at the sunlight through the leaves. Naturally, they were divided into several groups. After these young disciples entered the Aoyama sect, such a scene had happened many times. Now they were still separated according to their birthplace and status in the world. But in the future, it would depend on their respective cultivation state. Today was a little different. Whether it was the disciples from rich families or the children from poor families, they were all looking at the same place. Even those disciples who were seriously reading and staring at the sunlight would glance at that place from the corner of their eyes from time to time. Jingjiu and Lu Shui were standing there. Some were looking at Jingjiu, but more were looking at Lu Shui. No one had forgotten what Master Lu had said before he left. Who would have thought that the most valued disciple of the immortal master was not that handsome young man in white, but the little boy who looked like his attendant? What was so special about that little boy? The young man who had mocked his fellow disciple was called Shui Yong-yi, a disciple of an aristocratic family in Yuzhou County. One of his grandmasters was cultivating on the 6th peak, Shuriwe Peak. He was asking for information. Soon, the confirmed news came. This little boy was of natural Dao quality. The disciples looked at Lu Shui with shock in their eyes. Different from before, there was no look of jealousy, not even envy, except for shock. The gap between the two was too big, and they were not at the same level at all. What was the use of envy? There were countless talented disciples in the Aoyama sect, but how many people of natural Dao quality had appeared in recent years? Apart from Big Sister Zhao, there was only Big Brother Zhua, who had been accepted as the last disciple by the sect master on Tianguang Peak. Now there was such a person among them. How could they not be shocked? Shui Yong-yi was the first to know the news, so he was the first to recover from the shock. Ignoring his peers who were still in a daze, he walked straight to Lu Shui with a gentle smile on his face. "Young brother Lu, each of us will have a small courtyard to rest in. Which one will you choose? If you are not afraid of the noise of the stream at night, room A4 is an excellent choice. It is close to the training hall, and you can often consult the immortal masters. Besides, there is a patch of xingyang flowers planted outside the courtyard. The fragrance of the flowers is refreshing and has the effect of calming one's mind, which is very beneficial to our cultivation." Some disciples did not react, wondering why Big Brother Shui, who was usually so arrogant and cold, was so enthusiastic today. Some disciples could not stop smiling bitterly, thinking that Big Brother Shui's reaction was very fast. No one knew whether the xingyang flowers were good for cultivation, but if he could live next to that person with natural Dao quality, it would definitely be very helpful to his cultivation. Shui Yong-yi did not wait for Lu Shui's answer, because Lu Shui knew that Jingjiu would not choose this courtyard. Lu Shui gave Shui Yong-yi a grateful smile, carried his luggage, and walked to the training hall. He asked the deacon for the door number of the 2 small courtyards in the back mountain. Looking at the white-robed youth and the boy with natural Dao quality walking to the depths of the mountain path, the disciples were very surprised and speechless. Shui Yong-yi shook his head in confusion, saying, "This is really strange. Who would not find it strange that someone with natural Dao quality would be someone's servant?" There was a discussion in front of the training hall, and it was inevitable that some people would laugh at Jingjiu. Those girls paid no attention to it, looking at the mountain path. A girl said softly, "That young Master Jingjiu is really good-looking." Another girl said, "I heard that he is from Zhaoga, but I wonder which manor he is from." In the depths of the mountain path, in the dense forest far away from the stream, there were two adjacent small courtyards. The sunlight was blocked by the trees, so the small courtyards could be seen clearly. The door of the courtyard was pushed open. Lu Shui put down his luggage, looked around, and wiped a stone bench clean, ready to clean it. How do you know that I don't like the smell of Xingyang flowers? Jingjiu sat on the stone bench, looking at him with interest. In the past year, he and Lu Shui had talked a lot, but it was rare for him to show his emotions like this. I don't know, but that Big Brother said that the courtyard is by the stream. Lu Shui said, the stream is so loud, and young master likes to sleep, how could he be willing to live there? Jingju said, yes, I forgot about that. It was very quiet in the small courtyard. It looked like a thatched hut, but it was actually a cave inside, and it was also very clean, even spotless. If there were no disciples living here, the cleanliness would be maintained. Lu Shui didn't need to do much, so he quickly finished making the bed. He carried a plate of wild fruits distributed by the caretaker to the courtyard and put it on the stone table in front of Jingjiu. Seeing the uneasy expression on the boy's face, Jingjiu said, go back to your courtyard and read that book if you want. Lu Shui raised his head and said with a red face, I'm not in a hurry to leave to read that book. Jingjiu knew that he was so uneasy because he had heard the mockery of his fellow disciples, so he smiled and said nothing. The mountain wind blew gently, and the white frosted grass fell down. Looking at the cave wall, Jingjiu sighed with emotion. How many years has it been? He leaned against the window and sat down, flipping open the thin book in his hand. It was the oral formula of the Aoyama sect. It was simple and familiar, with only 2 minor changes compared to the old days. These 2 changes were quite interesting, but he couldn't read it for long. Jingjiu closed his eyes slowly. The oral formula was placed on his lap. The wind entered the cave and gently fluttered his clothes, and the pages of the book turned quickly, sometimes forward, sometimes backward. The pages turned at a high speed, and the words couldn't be seen clearly. Only the little person in the book kept moving. The little person was sometimes squatting in a strange horse stance, and sometimes standing like a pine tree. Most of the time, he was practicing a set of boxing moves, looking vigorous and extremely diligent. But Jingjiu had already fallen asleep. When he woke up, the sun had already set below the peaks, and the sky was dyed red. The cliff plateau nearby was already dark, and it was difficult to see anything. With a squeak, Lu Shui pushed open the door and ran in. His sweaty face was full of excitement, and he shouted, young master. Jingjiu recalled the memories from many years ago and reminded him, don't call people like this when you're outside, or you'll be beaten. Lu Shui wiped the sweat off his face with his sleeve and nodded. He wanted to say something but couldn't. He was a bit anxious. Jingjiu said, do you understand? Chapter 11. Previously, when Lu Shui returned to the small courtyard to read the introductory technique, he was very serious and focused on it. Soon, he had memorized all the content. At that time, the sun had not set, so he began to train his body according to the requirements of the book. At first, he practiced various postures, followed by the arrow steps and the reverse bridge, and finally, a set of fist technique. The fist technique was not difficult, but it required continuous exertion of force. If he continued for a long time, his breathing would become extremely difficult and he would not be able to continue. Just when he was about to give up, his chest and abdomen suddenly moved, and his breathing entered a strange rhythm that perfectly matched the exertion of force when he punched. The breathing rhythm was indeed strange. One moment it was long, the next moment it was rapid. It seemed to have no pattern, but Lu Shui was very familiar with it. Otherwise, he would not have been able to use it. It was the breathing method that Jingjiu taught him in the small village. Even now, he did not know that this breathing method was called human breathing. However, he seemed to be stupid, but he was actually very smart. He knew very well what it meant. Jingjiu did not say anything and only glanced at him. Lu Shui understood what he meant and quickly stood up. Back at the village entrance, Jingjiu took a look at him and knew that he was a one-in-a-million person with natural Tao quality. Otherwise, he would not have been chosen. In this year, Jingjiu did not teach him much. He only taught him the most basic human breathing. Although it was basic, it was extremely important. Lu Shui's Tao quality was well protected. As long as the people of Aoyama sect were not blind, they would definitely not miss it. However, Lu Shui only used half a day to discover the beauty of it. It was somewhat beyond his expectations. This child's comprehension was actually better than he had imagined. You do not need to thank me, Jingjiu said. You have taught me before. It is only an exchange. Lu Shui thought, how could chopping firewood and cooking be compared to cultivation? Jingjiu said again, cultivation requires concentration. The chores in the courtyard will be taken care of by the attendants. You do not need to think about coming here frequently. Lu Shui anxiously said, Young master, don't you want me any more? Jingjiu didn't like noise, so he raised his hand to signal him to stop talking. He looked at the courtyard outside the window and found that it was quite big. It would be troublesome to clean it up, and he didn't want strangers to touch his personal matters. Up to you then. The green leaves fell with the wind and flowed downstream with the stream. Time flowed like water, and soon, more than 10 days had passed. The outer sanctum disciples of the South Pine Pavilion trained diligently day and night. No one dared to relax. On the plateau, young disciples could be seen everywhere. Some were squatting, some were leaning against the pine trees, and most of them were practicing boxing. From dawn to dusk, the sounds of punches and shouts were unceasing. In early summer, the leaves rustled and fell, and the birds in the forest were even more restless. Faint white smoke could already be seen rising from the places where the fist winds were the strongest. Master Lu was quite satisfied with the result. He thought that by the end of the 3 months, more than half of the disciples would have successfully entered the initial realm. At this time, Lu Shui came out of the training hall. Master Lu looked at him with even more satisfaction. He smiled, thinking that he was indeed a natural Taoist quality and had lived up to his expectations. According to his judgment, in a few days at most, Lu Shui would be able to enter the spiritual stability realm. At this rate, in another year, this child might really reach the consummation of the spiritual stability realm. If the South Pine Pavilion could produce a genius disciple who could enter the inner sanctum within a year, thinking of senior brother Meng on the Shangda Peak, the desire in his heart grew stronger. If he hadn't been lucky enough to meet Zhao Liu, how could senior brother Meng have had such good fortune? Master Lu's gaze followed Lu Shui. As he watched him enter the small courtyard, his smile suddenly disappeared and he frowned. That small courtyard belonged to Jingjiu. Neither he nor the outer sanctum disciples knew what Jingjiu had been doing for the past 10 days. After noon, Jingjiu could be seen lying on a bamboo recliner, basking in the sun. No one knew where that bamboo recliner had come from. Master Lu increasingly felt that he had misjudged him. But what really displeased him was not Jingjiu's incompetence, but the fact that, until today, Lu Shui still regarded himself as Jingjiu's page boy or servant. Lu Shui was oblivious to the importance of the sect and the immortal master, and the respect of his fellow disciples. He continued to take care of Jingjiu's daily life as if he was in the small mountain village. Every day, apart from his hard practice, he would go to the small courtyard to do many chores. Every time they saw this scene, both Master Lu and the disciples felt that it was ridiculous, and naturally, they were very displeased with Jingjiu. According to the rules or habits of the Aoyama sect, they rarely interfered with the practice of the outer sanctum disciples. But the thought in Master Lu's heart grew stronger and stronger, and he was almost unable to suppress it. He didn't want that handsome youth to hinder the most promising genius of the Aoyama sect. He wanted to find a suitable opportunity to separate the master and servant pair, and even considered whether he should find a reason to drive Jingjiu out of the sect. In the dead of night, Lu Shui returned to his own courtyard, pushed open the door, and saw Master Lu standing in the courtyard. He was a very clever child, and he quickly guessed the immortal master's purpose for coming, and his face became somewhat pale. Seeing the change in his expression, Master Lu said, "It seems that I don't need to say anything more." Lu Shui pursed his lips and didn't speak. Master Lu didn't expect him to be so stubborn, and said in a low voice, "Cultivators ignore fate and look down on the common people. How can we be someone's servant?" Lu Shui lowered his head and said, "Young master has done me a great favor, and I want to repay him." Master Lu frowned and said, "I don't care what entanglements you have with him in the mortal world, but since you've come to this world, everything must be severed with a sword. Our Aoyama sect cultivates the way of the sword, and we embrace the heart of the sword. Don't tell me that we don't even have the ability to make such a decision?" Lu Shui's head was still lowered, and he said in a trembling voice, "If the immortal master wants to drive young master away, then I won't cultivate any more." Master Lu was slightly angered. Cultivation was the dream of countless mortals in the world, and he was actually going to give it up for someone else? But in the next moment, the anger in his heart turned into faint admiration. Lu Shui's resolute choice was also in line with the way of the sword of the Aoyama sect. Master Lu looked into Lu Shui's eyes and said, "I will respect your wishes, and won't drive him away by force, but you must understand that you are a true cultivation genius, far above that young master of yours. Whether you can adapt to this change or not, the change has already happened, and there will come a day when he can't keep up with your footsteps, and you will be separated by the clouds, never to meet again. I only hope that before that you won't be burdened by him too much." Having said this, he left the small courtyard. Lu Shui raised his head, and the expression on his little face was somewhat dazed. Chapter 12. The next morning, Lu Shui came again to sweep the courtyard, collect his breakfast, and gather the leaves into a beautiful pile. Jingjiu looked at him in silence. He had heard the conversation between Master Lu and Lu Shui last night. Even if he could not hear it, Master Lu would deliberately let him hear it. Master Lu hoped that he would have the self-awareness to drive Lu Shui away out of humiliation. Jingjiu understood Master Lu very well. If it were him, he would do the same. How could a cultivator waste time on such things? If Lu Shui had listened to Master Lu's advice, he would have understood and done the same. Before the great Tao, there was no heaven and earth, let alone a young master. But he did not expect that after tossing and turning all night, Lu Shui would still come today and do the same things, even more so than before. Jingjiu suddenly wanted to know what this little boy was thinking. But since Lu Shui did not listen to Master Lu's advice, he naturally would not drive Lu Shui away because of something as inexplicable as dignity. It was not easy to have someone familiar with his habits helping him take care of his daily life. In the long years before, he had never had such a person. After Lu Shui finished his morning chores, he brewed a pot of tea and placed it on the table. He then brought out the bamboo chair from the room. Jingjiu lay down on the bamboo chair, facing the rising sun. He narrowed his eyes and tapped his fingers on the chair's armrest without any rhythm. Lu Shui did not go to the training hall today. He stayed in the small courtyard, striding forward. His arms seemed to stretch out casually, but they were as fast as lightning. If it was in the past, he would not have reacted to the sound of Jingjiu tapping on the bamboo chair. But after a few days of confirmation, he naturally began to listen attentively. No rhythm was still a kind of rhythm. It still represented the length and interval of breathing. When the sun rose over the peaks, Lu Shui finally finished tempering his body. His little face was covered in sweat and his body was slightly sore. He did not feel that it was tiring. Instead, he felt that it was very enjoyable. He turned around to look at Jingjiu, who seemed to be sleeping soundly on the bamboo chair. He couldn't help but grin. Having known Jingjiu for a year, he knew that most of the time, Jingjiu looked like he was sleeping, but in fact, he wasn't. Young master, Lu Shui hesitated. He had never done such a thing before. But thinking of Master Lu's solemn face last night, he finally mustered up his courage and whispered, "Can you not be so lazy?" Lu Shui knew that his young master was very lazy. The bamboo chair he was sitting on was proof. He didn't know how he moved it from his home. He knew that the young master was a very smart person and was very capable. However, it was not easy for him to come to the Aoyama sect and have the chance to learn Sword Dao. How could he continue to be so lazy? If the young master continues to be so lazy, how will he pass the inner sect examination? What if he was really driven away by the immortal master? Even a child with natural Dao quality would not be able to hide his true emotions. Seeing the worry on Lu Shui's little face, Jingjiu was startled and then laughed. That night, Jingjiu stood in the small courtyard with his hands behind his back and looked at the peaks under the starry sky. He was silent. He did not listen to Lu Shui's advice. He strode forward and practiced his fists. He pursued the perfection of the realm of propriety and built a good foundation for his future cultivation. He did not need it. According to the standard of ordinary cultivators, he had long passed the realm of propriety and entered the realm of spiritual stability. To be more precise, when he stepped into the stream in the cave, he was already in the realm of spiritual stability. Looking back at the tens of thousands of years in Aoyama, he should be the one who entered the realm of spiritual stability the fastest. He did not feel proud, because he could only do so because of the special nature of his body. Naturally, a cultivator of Master Lu's realm could not see through the mystery. Everything in the world had its gains and losses. He took out a light blue elixir, threw it into his mouth, chewed it a few times, and swallowed it. He took a sip of herbal tea and shook his head, feeling that the taste was very ordinary. If this scene fell into the eyes of Master Lu or other immortals of Aoyama sect, they would probably be shocked to the core. The light blue elixir was called Zishuan elixir, the best elixir a cultivator could take in the initial realm. For disciples in the realm of spiritual stability, a Zishuan elixir was equivalent to a year of hard work. One could imagine how precious this elixir was. Only those disciples with the most potential would have such treatment. Few of the inherited sword disciples in the 9 peaks of Aoyama had taken this elixir when they were in the initial realm. But Jingjiu ate this precious elixir as if it were fried beans. Based on the number and frequency of the Zishuan elixir he took, it would only take an hour for an ordinary outer disciple to reach the perfection of the realm of spiritual stability. Of course, it was more likely that the outer disciple had died half an hour ago because the number of Zhen Yuan elixirs skyrocketed. Jingjiu didn't die. He didn't even have any reaction. It was still the same reason. His body was very special. It could absorb the qi of heaven and earth smoothly, and at the same time, it could bear more qi of heaven and earth. The problem was too much. His spiritual ocean was like a real sea, a bottomless sea. It would take a long time to fill this sea with qi of heaven and earth. Even if he kept taking Zishuan elixir, it was still very slow, and the elixir would eventually run out. If the spiritual ocean was not full, the Dao seed would be lonely, and it would not be able to turn into sword fruit and enter the next stage of cultivation. What could he do? If the rumor was true, and there was a treasure in the Zen land that could change time, maybe he could save some time. But he knew that treasure didn't exist, so he could only wait. He had calculated that after 3 days, Zishuan elixir would no longer be of any help to him, let alone those ordinary elixirs. Even if he kept absorbing chi of heaven and earth, it would take at least more than a year to fill his spiritual ocean. And it would take so many days. How troublesome! If he didn't want to attract too much attention and get himself into trouble, he could be like the other outer sect disciples, practicing diligently every day and get through this 1 year. But he wouldn't do that. Apart from the most secretive reason, it was also because he thought it would be troublesome to do so. Yes, he was just afraid of trouble, not really lazy. During the year in the mountain village, he slept most of the time, because he wanted to understand and familiarize himself with this body. In the first 9 days, he had only completed the initial integration, and it would take a long time for him to completely master the most minute parts of his body. He didn't lie to Shursui. In those dreams, in addition to further integration, he did do a lot of thinking, deduction, and calculation. He needed to think about why he was here. He needed to calculate the past and the future. He needed to calculate the gains and losses and the situation. He didn't return to the Aoyama sect until he had completed these 2 steps, and then he found that there was nothing else to do but wait. This was something he had never experienced before. Is this boredom? Chapter 13. The South Pine Pavilion was surrounded by outer sect disciples who were practicing hard. When they punched, it seemed that they were full of strength and momentum, but they were actually very careful. It required precise control, which was the requirement of the entry-level skills. Moreover, when a fellow disciple accidentally broke an ancient tree branch, the deacons didn't look too good. Those deacons used to be outer sect disciples, but because they couldn't enter the inner sect, they stayed at the South Pine Pavilion as deacons, so they naturally wouldn't be afraid of them. Suddenly, there was a cracking sound as a rather thick branch fell to the ground. A disciple withdrew his slightly numb fist and stared blankly at a certain place, completely forgetting the presence of the deacons. With a muffled sound, a shallow hole was punched in an ancient tree, the bark splashing everywhere. The disciple withdrew his bleeding fist, as if he didn't feel any pain at all. A disciple who was leaning against the pine tree fell on his buttock. Similar scenes happened in many places at the same time, and the forest was in chaos. Then a lot of discussion broke out. What's going on? What are you looking at? He's out. That person is out. On the cliff plateau, the wind from the fist gradually disappeared, and the white smoke also dissipated. It suddenly became very quiet. Several deacons walked out of the training hall with puzzled faces. Following the gaze of the disciples, their expressions also changed slightly. The mountain wind blew, the green grass swayed, and the white robe fluttered. That person actually came out of the small courtyard? It had been more than 10 days since he entered the South Mountain Gate, but Jingjiu had never appeared in front of others. For these disciples on the cliff plateau, this white-robed youth was very mysterious and strange. Today was the first time he left the small courtyard, so he naturally attracted many surprised and curious gazes. Being stared at by so many people, Jingjiu didn't care at all. He crossed the forest with his hands behind his back and walked in the direction of the training hall. A pretty girl summoned up her courage and said, "Junior brother Jing, nice to meet you." Jingjiu glanced at her to make sure he didn't know her, but he didn't stop and continued forward. Seeing this, someone said angrily, "You don't even want to nod your head?" The girl said hurriedly. Junior brother nodded his head. This was indeed true. Many disciples nearby could clearly see that Jingjiu had indeed nodded his head. However, the extent of his nod was too small. It looked like a stone being blown by the wind. If one didn't look carefully, it would be hard to notice. Is that a nod or charity? A disciple sneered and said, "You think you can be so arrogant just because you are good-looking and have money? Didn't he think that our Oyama sect is a place for cultivation? What's the use of all these worldly things? He had no right to be arrogant now. Now, junior brother Shui is the most outstanding figure. His former servant suddenly became someone beyond his reach. He must feel humiliated, so these geniuses don't want to come out. There were many explanations as to why Jingjiu refused to leave the small courtyard. Some said that he was lazy, but most of the disciples still held this view. The girl who greeted Jingjiu wanted to defend him, but she didn't know what to say, because no matter how she looked at it, it didn't make sense. Anyone in Jingjiu's situation would feel embarrassed or even humiliated. In the training hall, more than 10 disciples sat on the floor, holding books in their hands. They didn't flip through them, but were chatting about something. Shui Yong-yi, who had a background, sat in a conspicuous position, but he was not the central figure. In fact, all the disciples, including him, were sitting around Lu Shui. They should be talking about problems in cultivation. Obviously, this was not the first time such a scene had happened. There was not much tension on Lu Shui's little face. Listening to him talking about his preparation for the breakthrough in a clear and childish voice, the disciples' faces were full of smiles. They didn't deliberately flatter him, but absolutely respected him. The 2 female disciples looked at Lu Shui with admiration in their eyes. Although Master Lu and Lu Shui didn't say it, some disciples guessed that Lu Shui had successfully entered the state of spiritual stability. It was really shocking that he could enter the state of spiritual stability in such a short time at such a young age. Who knew how far this person with natural Taoist quality could go in the future? Come here. A calm and emotionless voice rang out, breaking the quiet and focused atmosphere in the training hall. The disciples looked back at the entrance of the training hall and saw the falling sunlight being blown into a beautiful halo by a white robe. The 2 girls were very surprised and almost cried out, but they quickly covered their mouth. The male disciples reacted much slower than the 2 girls. After a while, they came to their senses and found that the person was Jingjiu. Everyone looked at Jingjiu with complicated emotions. In addition to surprise, there were sympathy, pity, mockery, and some disgust and displeasure. As the disciple in the forest said, the disciples of the South Pine Pavilion all thought that Jingjiu refused to leave the small courtyard because Lu Shui's performance was too outstanding. But why did he come out today? Shui Yongyi looked at Jingjiu and sneered. Can't you see we are discussing cultivation homework? Also, who are you yelling at? Come here? Who do you think you are? Do you still think you are a young master? Nobody responded to Shui Yongyi's words. Even Shui Yongyi's voice grew softer and softer until it disappeared completely. It was because the scene he wanted to see the most, where Lu Shui was moved by his words and ignored Jingjiu with a red face, didn't happen. As he was saying this, Lu Shui had already run to Jingjiu's side, saying, "Young master, you are finally willing to come out." Everyone could see that he was really happy. His little face was full of smiles like a flower. Back in Jingjiu's courtyard, Lu Shui was still in a state of excitement. He kept asking why he came out today, whether he would go out often in the future, whether he had finally thought it through and was ready to cultivate. For the first time, Jingjiu felt that this child was a bit noisy. He raised his right hand. Lu Shui quickly shut up. After you left in the morning, I remembered that I forgot something, so I went to call you. Jingjiu thought for a moment and explained, "It's not that I don't want to go out, I'm just too lazy to go out." Lu Shui nodded repeatedly to show that he understood and asked curiously, "Young master, what do you want from me?" Jingjiu said, "You have broken through the realm?" Lu Shui didn't dare to look him in the eyes. He lowered his head and said, "Immortal Master didn't allow me to say." Master Lu didn't allow him to say it because he was afraid that it would affect the cultivation of other disciples. A genius like him could inspire his peers to work hard, but it was also very likely to destroy their confidence. Other than this reason, Lu Shui didn't tell Jingjiu about it, because he had other reasons. These days, he had heard a lot of discussions, whether intentionally or unintentionally. The praise from his peers made him very happy, but the ridicule of the young master made him very uncomfortable. He couldn't judge whether those discussions were true or not. If so, would the young master be stimulated by his success in breaking through the realm? He also knew that his thoughts were a little naive. The young master was knowledgeable and omniscient, but he was a little lazy. How could he care about these things? It was just in case. Drink this cup of tea. Jingju didn't think about what the little fellow was thinking. He just wanted to finish this thing as soon as possible and then find something to pass the time these days. Lu Shisui took the tea and asked, "What's in the tea?" It was the first time that Jingju had left the small courtyard and called him back, so this cup of tea couldn't be ordinary tea. "I've put a pill in it, which will help you stabilize the realm of spiritual stability." Jingju didn't tell the little fellow that there was an extremely precious Zishuan pill in this cup of tea, nor did he warn him not to tell this matter. Lu Shisui didn't drink the tea. He looked at him with a bitter face and said, "Immortal Master also gave me a few pills. Will the efficacy of the pills conflict with each other?" Jingju said, "Those are too bad. I don't want to eat them." Lu Shisui said, "Oh," and didn't ask anything else. He drank the tea in one gulp. Obviously, he was helping him. Seeing him drink the tea without hesitation, Jingju didn't know why he felt a little happy. After waking up in that cave residence, the young man in white hadn't been happy for a long time. "Since I'm in a good mood today, well, it's normal, but it's boring." "Yes, boring," Jingju said. "If you don't understand anything, just ask me." Aoyama sect's training of external disciples was very strange. They just threw an introductory incantation and didn't care about it anymore. Although Lu Shisui was born with natural Taoist quality, he was a beginner in cultivation after all. There were many problems in cultivation. He had long wanted to ask Jingju, just like in the village, but he didn't dare to. At this time, he found that Jingju was in a really good mood. Of course, it could also be that he was really bored, so he didn't want to miss this opportunity. Okay. One asked questions, and the other answered. They went back and forth like this. The sun gradually slanted, the shadows of the trees grew longer, and dusk came. Lu Shisui finally solved all the problems in cultivation. Jingju's answers were like the sharpest sword light in the world, easily cutting off the most complicated relationships and revealing the true face of cultivation. It turned out that it was so simple and clear. Looking at Jingju, Lu Shisui's eyes were full of admiration. He knew that the young master was great, but he didn't know that the young master was so great. Now that he thought about it, his worries were really naive and childish. According to his usual habit, Lu Shisui took out the sealwort biscuits and dried fruits distributed by the deacon and shared them with Jingju. Then he was ready to go back. But today, Jingju asked him to stay a little longer. He looked into Lu Shisui's eyes and said calmly, "Actually, I also have something to ask you." Lu Shisui was a little surprised and asked, "What is it? Why did you do that?" Jingju asked. Lu Shisui thought for a while before he understood what he was talking about. He said, "The young master treats me." Jingju raised his hand. Lu Shisui stopped talking immediately. What he wanted to ask had nothing to do with those discussions, but something else. "You are very smart, kind, and have a firm temperament that doesn't match your age. You also have a very firm view of right and wrong, though naive and childish." Chapter 14. This sentence was very difficult to understand, because there was no logical relationship. It seemed to be without a beginning or end. He didn't know if Lu Shisui understood what he said, but he didn't answer Jingju's question. He lowered his head, pursed his lips, and refused to speak. He looked like a stubborn child who refused to admit his mistake even if he died. The problem was that the more he acted like this, the more the parents knew that the child must have made a mistake. Everyone knew that he must have understood Jingjiu's words. Jingjiu did not ask him again. When he woke up from his spring sleep the next day, Shui fetched some water for him to wash his face and combed his hair. The wooden comb slid through her black hair. Lu Shui wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. After a while of hesitation, he summoned up the courage to say, "Young master, big brothers also have many questions that they want to ask you to help them with." Jingjiu spun his head around and shot him a glance. Shui said with his head lowered, "We were discussing some puzzles yesterday. You taught me in the evening, and I told them when I got back. They still have some questions, some of which I can answer, and some of which I don't understand," so Jingjiu was not surprised. Shui was a warm-hearted child. Since Jingjiu didn't say that he couldn't tell others about it last night, it was an inevitable development. That was the rule of the Aoyama sect. It was difficult for the outer disciples to receive much guidance and help from their masters. They could only rely on their own comprehension and hard work to move forward. That was why they cherished the opportunity to be able to answer their own questions. "This is troublesome," Jingjiu sighed. Seeing that Jingjiu wasn't angry, Lu Shui knew he had a chance, so he said hurriedly, "Didn't you teach us when we didn't understand the books in the village?" "That's right. Seeing that you've served me so diligently, and it's really boring. Besides, if I don't show something, I'm afraid I'll really be driven away." Jingjiu seemed to be talking to himself, but his gaze was fixed on Shui. Shui realized that he had already guessed his intention, and lowered his head shyly. Jingjiu patted his head and said, "You are still a child. You should focus on cultivation in the future. Don't think too much about other things." Shui thought to himself, "You're not much older than me, so why do you always talk like an elder?" Walking into the training hall, Jingjiu saw several young disciples. Yesterday, these young disciples were also in the training hall. Those who were able to discuss with Lu Shui about the spiritual stability realm should be among the more talented outer disciples in this session. Looking at Jingjiu, their expressions were a little awkward. These days on the cliff plateau of the South Pine Pavilion, they were part of the ridicule towards Jingjiu. "You're an idiot in cultivation, but your attendant is a genius. How can you still have the face to stay here?" Looking at it now, these comments were like a heavy slap to their faces. It was very hot. Not everyone present was waiting for Jingjiu's answer, such as Shuiyong's granduncle was an elder of the 6th peak, Shuriyue Peak. He had been exposed to cultivation since he was a child, so it wasn't difficult for him to learn the rudimentary methods. He looked at Jingjiu and said mockingly, "Relying on your family's wealth and power, you think you can rule the world just because you've read a few books? Who on earth is the one with natural Tao quality?" Jingjiu didn't pay attention to him, and said to those young disciples, "Tell me." Shuiyong was even angrier that Jingjiu ignored him. As he was about to mock him some more, he suddenly saw Lu Shui's eyes. That pair of eyes were very clear, with a hint of childishness. But at the moment they looked very focused, with a hint of ferocity, like a young tiger staring at its prey. For some reason, Shuiyong felt a little cold. He knew that Lu Shui was the one with natural Tao quality, and if he made a fuss, he wouldn't be able to gain any advantage. So he gave up with a sneer, turned around and walked out of the training hall. Jingjiu didn't pay attention to what Shuiyong said, nor did he notice the change in Lu Shui's eyes. Seeing those young disciples still in a daze, he reminded them again, "Questions?" The young disciples finally came to their senses. If they hadn't heard Lu Shui admit last night that those questions were all answered by Jingjiu, they definitely wouldn't have asked Jingjiu for advice. But they were all dedicated to cultivation, so once they made up their minds, they didn't hesitate anymore. Very soon, they handed over the papers that they had prepared in advance, very politely. Jingjiu took the papers and quickly read through them. Then he raised his head and looked at the crowd, asking, "You don't understand any of these?" His tone was very calm, and he didn't put much emphasis on the word all, nor did he mean to mock them. When he said all, he meant all, not all. But when this calmness was combined with the confusion in his eyes, there were still many inexplicable feelings. It seemed that to him, it was really hard to understand why people would be puzzled by the questions on the papers. In other words, it was hard for him to imagine that there were such stupid people in the world, or that there were so many stupid people. The disciples felt very uncomfortable. Jingjiu took out a piece of paper and raised his head to look at the crowd. A girl walked out hesitantly and said timidly, "Junior brother Jing, I wrote it." Jingjiu didn't look at her and said directly, "You're wrong here. With your current state, you don't need to think too much about the relationship between the spiritual ocean and the sword fruit. Otherwise, it will affect your understanding of the operation of Zhen Yuan. As for how to see it, I'll write it down for you later." Then he took out a second piece of paper. A male disciple raised his right hand nervously. Jingjiu still didn't look up at him. Looking at the questions on the paper, he said, "The heavenly spring infusing in the incantation doesn't talk about attracting the qi of heaven and earth, but the connection of body and mind. Only in this way can you perceive the qi of heaven and earth. You haven't even done this step, and you want to separate your divine sense from your body. Of course, it's wrong. As for how to do it, I'll draw a diagram for you later." Then he took out a third piece of paper. "You've misunderstood this sentence. It's impossible. You've completely misunderstood. The Tao seed will wither and die. You drew the diagram of meridians incorrectly. You'll be paralyzed. You're right at the front, but wrong at the back. You were wrong at the beginning, so naturally, you're wrong at the end as well. From the front to the back, you're not right." Jingjiu's voice echoed in the quiet training hall. The content of these words sounded very direct, and even a little harsh, but his voice was very calm, or rather, flat, without any big ups and downs, and no emotion could be heard. But the more it was like this, the clearer it was, the more convincing it was, and the more lethal it was. The young disciples lowered their heads more and more, their faces turning redder and redder. It was something they couldn't understand no matter how hard they tried, so why was the other party able to explain it clearly with the simplest words and make them realize their mistakes? Jingjiu walked to the back of the table and took the pen that Lu Shisui handed to him. He began to write on the paper, which was what he had promised these disciples to do. The disciples surrounded them and watched attentively. No one spoke, and even their breathing became lighter. The training hall became even quieter. The morning light gradually brightened, and the sun rose from the peak. A voice rang out. "What are you doing?" Chapter 15. The disciples greeted Master Lu and hurriedly explained that this was junior brother Jingjiu, who was helping them answer their questions. Master Lu's expression changed slightly as he looked at Jingjiu, who was still writing rapidly behind the desk. He thought to himself, "What kind of ability does this kid have that he dares to speak nonsense and not mislead the disciples?" Suddenly, he thought of the relationship between Jingjiu and Lu Shisui and became even more nervous. He said in a low voice, "Let me see." At this moment, Jingjiu finished writing the last word. Seeing that he had no objections, Lu Shisui handed the papers to Master Lu with both hands. Master Lu took the papers and was about to reprimand him, but when he saw the words on the papers, he made a sound of surprise. The disciples did not know what had happened and stood nervously at the side. Master Lu narrowed his eyes slightly and no longer spoke. Instead, he began to carefully read the papers. The training hall became even quieter. "What's going on?" The more he read, the more shocked Master Lu was. The entry-level incantation of the Aoyama sect was not difficult. Compared to other sects, it was straightforward and simple. If one had access to the relevant cultivation knowledge before entering the sect, it should be easy to pass. Lu Shui and most of the outer sect disciples had not been exposed to cultivation, so they would naturally encounter many difficult problems. Even if Jingjiu was a disciple of an aristocratic family in Chaoga and had knowledge in this area, the words on the papers revealed his insight and ability. It was too outstanding. Could it be that his talent for comprehension was actually that high? Master Lu looked at Jingjiu, his eyes much gentler. When he saw the comments on the last page, he could not help but frown. He wanted to reprimand Jingjiu, but he suppressed it out of admiration. He handed the papers back to Lu Shui and looked at the disciples. Do you know why the outer sect disciples of the Aoyama sect are only taught the incantation and not explained? Because the sect wants to see your individual comprehension and temperament, so that we can teach you in accordance with your aptitude. Today, you did not know the reason and asked for guidance from a fellow disciple, so you will not be punished, but this will not happen again. The disciples were enlightened and said that they wouldn't dare to do it again, but in their hearts they thought that Jingjiu's answers were correct. In such an atmosphere, Jingjiu's voice rang out again. This method is too stupid. We should change it. The training hall suddenly became quiet. The disciples were dumbfounded, thinking that Junior Jingjiu was not only knowledgeable, but also courageous. He dared to question the sect's rules in front of the immortal master. Master Lu was stunned at first, but then he laughed in anger. He thought that this young man was childish and adorable, saying that the rules of Aoyama sect were wrong and should be changed. Did he think that he was the sect master? Jingjiu was rarely in the mood to talk, so he didn't notice the expressions of Master Lu and his colleagues. He continued, for example, the people of Qingrong Peak. Lu Shui looked at Master Lu's expression and hurriedly pulled on his sleeve. The thing that the young disciples were most worried about did not happen. What Jingjiu was about to say was interrupted by a sudden loud noise. The loud noise came from outside the training hall, probably from somewhere far away, because the buzzing sound reverberated among the peaks and didn't stop for a long time. The young disciples ran out of the training hall and looked up at the sky, only to find that there were only some thin clouds floating in the sky. There were no traces of lightning. And even if there really was a thunderstorm, it couldn't break through the protection of Aoyama's great formation. What was that thunderous noise? Master Lu and Jingjiu were the last to walk out of the training hall, so they naturally knew what that noise was. Over there! Some disciples shouted excitedly. A hole was broken in the thin clouds, and they could see very clearly. Looking from the ground, they could see the azure sky like a beautiful piece of porcelain. A flash of sword light flew back from the hole in the clouds, traveling back and forth in the sky. Looking at this scene and thinking of the stories they had heard, the disciples finally understood that someone was riding a flying sword. The loud noise just now was probably the explosive sound of a flying sword tearing through the air. It was just that they didn't know which senior brother in the inner sect was riding the sword. Riding a sword for the first time, and already able to break through the clouds and move thunder. As expected of someone with natural Tao quality. Master Lu praised as he looked at the flash of sword light high in the sky. Hearing this, the disciples finally knew who was riding the sword, and they became even more excited, incessantly discussing it. The face of the young female disciple was full of admiration, and in her excitement, she actually shouted loudly. Cheers rang out all around the training hall, and even among the peak. Looking at the flash of sword light going up and down in the sky, swaying incessantly and leaving a somewhat unstable trail, Jingjiu shook his head. That sword rider clearly had no experience, but he was blindly seeking speed, which in his opinion was really bad enough. But the flash of sword light quickly stabilized, looking like a white line in the blue sky, perfectly straight. This somewhat exceeded Jingjiu's expectations, and he said, "Not bad." The flash of sword light flew back among the peaks and disappeared. Somewhere there were faint cheers. The tense atmosphere in front of the training hall had completely disappeared, and the young disciples all looked happy. Jingjiu didn't understand what was going on, thinking that it was just a successful riding of a sword. Why was there such jubilation inside and outside of the Aoyama sect? Hearing his question, Lu Shui didn't quite explain. That's the eldest sister we are talking about. Jingjiu asked, Who? Lu Shui said with his eyes wide open, Senior Sister Zhao. Jingjiu thought for a moment and asked, Who is that? Only then did Lu Shui remember that it was the first time his young master had left the small courtyard until yesterday, and he really wasn't familiar with the affairs of the sect, so he hurriedly explained. Jingjiu remembered that on the day he first entered the sect, a disciple had mentioned a genius girl surnamed Zhao, and her name seemed to be Lei. This Zhao Leu entered the Aoyama sect at the age of 12, and it only took her 1 year to reach the consummation of the state of spiritual stability and become an inner sect disciple. It was said that in less than 3 months after she entered the inner sect, an ancient sword on Yunxing Peak recognized her as its master. Lu Shui said, Yunxing Peak is the 4th peak, which is shrouded in clouds all year round. There are countless famous swords hidden among the rocks and cliffs, so it is also called the Sword Peak. Jingjiu said, I know that. Keep talking about her. Lu Shui said, Senior Sister Zhao is only 14 years old, but she can already fly by riding a sword, so she must have reached the consummation of the state of knowing tranquility, or even the state of perfect preservation. Jingjiu glanced at him and said, And? Lu Shui thought that his young master was really not a person who was suitable to listen to stories. Shouldn't he be more surprised after hearing such a shocking story? A disciple said, There are many young geniuses in the world of cultivation these years, such as Lo Huainan, Tong Yen, and Bai Zhao, who are famous and have reached the 4th state at such a young age. But our Aoyama sect has lost such peerless geniuses since the ascension of the senior grandmaster. Although the senior brothers on Liangwang Peak are strong, I always feel that something is missing. Another disciple sneered and said, That's because the world is ignorant and doesn't know that the senior brothers on Liangwang Peak seek the Tao in sword fights, and they don't care about the so-called state and reputation. That disciple said, Of course we know that, but the disciples of other sects won't admit it. Don't forget that Senior Brother Zhua is in closed-door training at Tianguang Peak. When he comes out, he will be famous all over the land. Senior Brother Zhua is only one person after all, and a single tree can't make a forest. Senior Sister Zhao has broken all the cultivation records of our Aoyama sect in the past 100 years. After the inherited sword competition in 2 years, she will become a real master of swordsmanship, and she can compete with the young geniuses outside. Even the Zen master of Guoqing Temple may be able to challenge her. That disciple said again, I heard that all the peaks are fighting for Senior Sister Zhao. Is that right, Master Lu? Master Lu smiled and said, Of course, but it still depends on which swordsmanship she chooses. When that disciple mentioned the Zen master of Guoqing Temple, Jingjiu thought he finally heard a name he knew. Chapter 16. In the dead of night, Jingjiu's courtyard welcomed his first guest besides Lu Shui. He knew he would come, so he stood in the courtyard in advance and waited. It was not to show respect, but because he was not used to others entering his cave abode, even though the room he was living in was far from a cave abode. Master Lu did not know this, and was somewhat gratified by his intelligence and courtesy. The answers you gave to your fellow disciples in the morning were all correct. Master Lu took out a piece of paper from his sleeve and said, But you answered the last question incorrectly. Jingjiu was somewhat puzzled, thinking how could he have been wrong. He took the paper and looked at it, then roughly understood what was going on. After understanding it, you did not understand this paragraph in the incantation. This paragraph is a new interpretation of this book. Master Lu looked at him with a gentle expression and said, Of course, this is not your fault. In fact, for many years, the Aoyama sect's understanding of this book has been wrong. Jingju said, "No, the sect's previous understanding was not wrong, but this interpretation is wrong." Master Lu smiled and said, "This is the new interpretation that Master Granduncle personally made. How could it be wrong?" The current Aoyama sect's entry-level incantation had 2 modifications, both of which were the work of Jingyang. Jingju naturally knew about this, and also knew that one of the modifications was wrong. Anyone can make a mistake, whether he is an outer disciple or Master Granduncle. Jingju said. Master Lu's expression changed slightly, thinking how absurd this was. He also thought about that morning, when Jingju said that the sect's method of educating outer disciples was wrong, and that the rules should be changed. Your comprehension and talent are indeed excellent, and your thinking is even more meticulous, but this is not a reason for you to act presumptuously. Master Lu looked at him and said in a low voice, "You must know that the disciples of our Aoyama sword sect must have pride, but they must not have arrogance." Arrogance? Thinking of the 2 modifications on the entry-level incantation, Jingju felt somewhat emotional. Back then, Jingyang was indeed the most arrogant person in the world. That was why he made all these mistakes. Seeing that he was silent, Master Lu thought that he had understood, so he said earnestly, "The tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. The sword that leaves the 9 peaks must meet the strong wind. If you want to go further on the path of cultivation, you must learn how to restrain your pride. Even if you want to help your fellow disciples, you can use other methods, but you must not break the rules." "But this rule is really stupid," Jingju said. "The one on Qingrong Peak is from the southern village, so she doesn't know the language of the imperial court. She couldn't even understand the introductory magic script when she was in the outer gate. If no one taught her how to read and write, the Aoyama sect would have missed this genius." Hearing his first sentence, Master Lu was enraged and was about to reprimand him, but when he heard his second sentence, he couldn't help but be surprised. "How did you know?" This story was about the current peak master of Qingrong Peak. It was not a secret, but an anecdote. But Jingjiu was only an outer disciple, so how could he have heard it? Jingjiu thought that he had seen the girl practice calligraphy day and night with his own eyes. Did he have to tell him? Master Lu wondered if this youth was like Zhuoruzhui and the other young disciples on Liangwang Peak, a pawn planted by the sect in advance. Which peak's martial uncle and martial uncle were the ones who placed the chess piece this time? Time flowed like water. A year passed in the blink of an eye. It was once again the time of deep spring. Lu Shui walked out of the training hall and walked along the stone path into the depths of the forest. The dozens of outer disciples on the plateau were used to this scene and knew where he was going. They didn't think it was strange and greeted him. Lu Shui nodded and returned the greeting with a smile. He was now 12 years old, so in a sense, he should be called a youth. His appearance was still simple and amiable, but his eyes were calmer and his temperament had changed the most. He walked with a smile, looking very relaxed. Seeing Lu Shui walk into the small courtyard, the disciples gathered together and discussed him again. As a key disciple of Aoyama sect, Lu Shui's every move was being watched. After one night, everyone knew that he had applied for the inner sect examination. Only those who had completed the state of spiritual stability would be able to sense the sword embryo and qualify to enter the inner sect. The problem was that Lu Shui had only been in Aoyama sect for a year. For countless years, only the rumored ascended senior grandmaster had entered the inner sect in half a year. Zhuoruzhui was the personal disciple of the sect master of Aoyama sect, and was now behind closed doors at Tianguang Peak. It had taken him a year and a half to enter the inner sect from the North Crane Pavilion. Even a genius like Zhao Leia had taken a whole year. No one thought that Lu Shui could pass the inner sect examination this time. Although he was also a 1 in a million natural Taoist quality, in the eyes of the disciples, he was not as good as senior sister. One thought was that if Lu Shui had not been too distracted by other things, his chances of success would have been much higher. The so-called other things were, of course, the things that happened in Jingju's courtyard. Because of these things, many people were very dissatisfied with Jingju. They felt that he had delayed Lu Shui's cultivation and did not know the severity of the situation. Some even thought that he was jealous of Lu Shui and did it on purpose. Of course, some people did not see it this way. They were very grateful to Jingju because Jingju did not listen to Master Lu's advice and would occasionally help the disciples solve some problems. Master Lu also gradually stopped paying attention to Jingju and no longer thought that he was a disciple chosen in advance by some big shot from a certain peak. Because Jingju was really too lazy. He had never participated in the routine inspection of the outer sect disciples in Aoyama. He did not even bother to find a reason to take leave. Every time, he would have to trouble Lu Shui to plead for him. Moreover, no one had ever seen him cultivate. For such a person, no matter how profound his knowledge was, no matter how outstanding his perception was, in the end, he was just a nobody. Walking into the small courtyard and looking at Jingju on the bamboo chair, Lu Shui's calm smile turned into a helpless bitter smile. In this year, he had tried to persuade Jingju many times, but Jingju did not listen. He still lay on the bamboo chair every day, basking in the sun and daydreaming. But he did not know when it started, there was an extra porcelain plate next to the bamboo chair. The porcelain plate had some clean sand in it. Lu Shui had carefully observed it and found that the sand in the porcelain plate had increased in number, now occupying 1/3 of the plate. He did not know what this porcelain plate and the sand were used for. Jingju had never explained it, but it was obvious that he attached great importance to these things, not even allowing Shui to touch them. "Young master, I went to talk to Master Lu last night, to prepare to participate in the inner sect examination." Lu Shui looked at Jingju nervously and said, "I only went to talk to him because I really felt that I could pass." Jingju glanced at him and said, "It has been more than a year, and if you still can't pass, then there is something wrong." Lu Shui came to his senses. Back in the village, young master had taught him how to breathe, which meant that he had started cultivating before he entered the Aoyama sect. He was somewhat disappointed. Even if he could pass the inner sect examination in this way, he would not be the fastest. But then he became happy again, feeling much more confident. Jingju said, "Both of you have natural Tao quality. You can't be worse than that, anyone." "Big sister Zhao Leu," Lu Shui said helplessly. "Oh," Jingju said. The atmosphere in the small courtyard suddenly became quiet. It was not because the topic could not continue, but because Lu Shui had thought of many other things. It had been a year since he came to the Aoyama sect, and he had met many people and things that he could not imagine in the village. He had grown up at an unimaginable speed. The more he learned, the more uneasy he felt. Whether it was the breathing in the village or the many things that had happened later, it all showed that Jingju had many secrets. Would those secrets be a problem? Would it be a problem for them, or would it be a problem for the Aoyama sect? After a long silence, Lu Shui finally asked in a low voice, "Young master, are you a spy from another sect?" Chapter 17. Jingju was confused and asked, "What?" Lu Shui said nervously, "If you are a spy from another sect, then you should leave quickly. I won't tell anyone." Jingju finally understood what he meant. He shook his head with a smile and put down the sand in his hand. A year ago, he had asked Lu Shui why he still stayed by his side. Lu Shui didn't answer as if he didn't understand, but Jingju knew that he could understand his question. At that time, Lu Shui was already suspicious of him, and even deliberately arranged the question-and-answer contest, hoping that he could make some contributions to the sect, so that he could plan for the future. This idea and arrangement were indeed naive, but for a little boy, what else could he ask for? Since that day, Lu Shui hadn't brought up this topic, and he finally asked about it today. Because he was about to enter the inner sect and become a real disciple of Aoyama sect, not just a boy servant of Jingjiu. Jingjiu wasn't disappointed or angry about this. Instead, he thought it was a little cute. This had nothing to do with betrayal. It was just growth. So he smiled. His smile was very beautiful. It was like the ice that had not melted for 10,000 years was finally melted by the spring sun, and then a beautiful lotus flower was born from it. Lu Shui was dazzled by his smile and sighed, "Master is still so handsome." Jingjiu looked at the face reflected in the porcelain plate and said, "Yes, it's been 2 years, but I'm still not used to it." Lu Shui came back to his senses and asked anxiously, "Master, who are you?" Jingjiu said, "I don't want to tell you." Lu Shui was a little dejected and said, "Oh." Seeing him like this, Jingjiu comforted him, "I'm not a spy anyway." Lu Shui thought about it seriously and found that it was true, so he didn't worry anymore. How could someone as beautiful as the young master be a spy? And he was so lazy. How could there be such a lazy spy in the world? If he stayed in the courtyard all day, what could he possibly find out? All the outer sect disciples of the South Pine Pavilion came to the training hall, and so did the deacons. Lu Shui stood on the stone steps and looked back. He was a little nervous, not because of those expectant or jealous gazes, but because Jingjiu did not come. Master Lu patted his shoulder and said, "No problem." He was clear that he was not the first person to discover that Lu Shui had natural Dao quality, but he had personally brought Lu Shui back from the small mountain village. In the past year, he had given Lu Shui the greatest attention and protection. He thought that he knew Lu Shui very well. This child not only had excellent talent and extraordinary spiritual root, but more importantly, he was sincere and diligent in cultivation. His foundation was extremely solid, and the probability of him passing the inner core assessment today was very high. He also thought of another person that he had thought highly of, and that was Jingjiu. In his view, Jingjiu's talent was ordinary, and his spiritual root was ordinary, but his comprehension and wisdom were very outstanding, far surpassing the ordinary disciples, even far better than him. It was just that the young man really had no desire to improve. Half a year ago, he had used the piercing discernment to check once and found that Jingjiu had not developed the Dao quality, which disappointed him to the extreme. Master Lu stopped thinking about this matter and said to Lu Shui, "Remember, the most important thing is to have no distracting thoughts." Lu Shui nodded vigorously, and under the gaze of his master and fellow disciples, walked into a seemingly ordinary room deep in the training hall. The person in charge of this assessment was an immortal master sent by the 6th peak, Shilai Peak, and the immortal master Mingguishing, who had been recruiting outside the South Pine Pavilion. "Greetings, Uncle Ming." "Greetings, Uncle Master." Until today, Lu Shui had not entered the 9 peaks, but he had already gained a great reputation among the 9 peak. A person with natural Dao quality was bound to be the focus of the Aoyama sect's training. Who would dare to look down on him? The Uncle Master from Shilai Peak nodded with a gentle expression, and Mingguishing was very happy, smiling and patting him on the shoulder. It should be known that Lu Shui's name was written by him on the register, and in the future, this child's name would shake the world, and it would be his glory. Mingguishing thought of the unbelievably good-looking young man in white that day, and asked, "How has your young master been recently?" Lu Shui did not know how to answer. The Uncle Master from Shilai Peak glanced at Mingguishing, inquiring with his eyes. Mingguishing gestured with his right hand on his face, and the Uncle Master from Shilai Peak immediately knew who he was talking about, and smiled without saying anything. Regardless of whether you can pass the test or not, you must not tell anyone about the details of the test, especially what you have learned from it. The Uncle Master from Shilai Peak stopped smiling, and looked at Lu Shui as he said this. Mingguishing was also very serious, and added, including your young master. Lu Shui was silent for a while before replying. Mingguishing and the Uncle Master walked out of the small room and closed the door. Lu Shui walked to the front of the table and took a nervous breath. There was a shelf on the table, and on the shelf was a strip-shaped object. It looked black, but its surface was very smooth, and an extremely cold aura was faintly emitted from it. This was the sword embryo. Lu Shui calmed himself down and placed his palm on the sword embryo. He closed his eyes and began to urge the Zhen Yuan to flow in his meridians. The sword embryo could sense the amount of Zhen Yuan in a cultivator, and it could even go upstream to reflect the cultivator's spiritual ocean in the most minute way. Only when the spiritual ocean was filled could it provide sufficient nutrients for the Tao seed and form a sword fruit. Cultivators who had no hope of forming a sword fruit were naturally not qualified to enter the inner sect of Aoyama sect. There was a buzzing sound. The sound sounded muffled, but it was incomparably clear, as if countless swords were colliding at the same time. Outside the door, Mingguishing and the Uncle Master from Shilai Peak looked at each other, their eyes full of shock and joy. As expected of the legendary natural Tao seed, it could actually cause such a strong resonance with the sword embryo. One had to know that the child had only cultivated for a year, and was only 12 years old. An hour later, Lu Shui walked out of the training hall. Outside the training hall, Master Lu, the disciples, and the attendants had already heard the sword chime, but they still looked at him nervously. Lu Shui nodded and then smiled happily. Master Lu was very gratified, and the outer disciples were even more excited, their cheers spreading far and wide. The cheers spread to the small courtyard in the depths of the forest. Jingjiu smiled. He had never thought that Shui could not pass the inner sect examination, so he was too lazy to look. A natural Tao seed, built his foundation half a year earlier, and even ate a Zishuan pill. How could he still not succeed? Unless this person had the same bottomless spiritual ocean as him, but where in the world could he find a second person like him? The courtyard door was pushed open, and Lu Shui ran in, but he could not speak. He did not know how to express his feelings. It was rare for Jingjiu to stand up from the bamboo chair. He clasped his hands behind his back, looked at Lu Shui, and said calmly and seriously, "The Great Way is dangerous and long, and it is rare to travel together. In the end, you are already on your way, so you must concentrate even more. You will be gone for many years, and it is natural to forget. Do not deliberately remember, that is not beautiful." Lu Shui was stunned for a moment before he understood what he was talking about, and said angrily, "I will not forget." Chapter 18. Lu Shui left the cliff platform and went to the peaks, never coming back. The last thing he saw was his little face, which was slightly red because of anger, and his eyes, which were full of tears because of his reluctance to leave. The only person who saw this scene was Jingjiu, but he soon forgot about it. Just like what he said to Lu Shui, the Tao was long, and people couldn't remember everything in the past, and they didn't need to. From this point of view, he was indeed a natural cultivation practitioner. After Lu Shui left, Jingjiu continued to live the same life, except that he had to make the bed and make the quilt himself. The courtyard seemed a bit deserted, and it took him a few days to get used to it again. The mockery and ridicule from the outer sect disciples on the plateau increased again during this period of time. Lu Shui had entered the inner gate, but he was still hanging around here, which was a very embarrassing thing in anyone's eyes. Jingjiu didn't feel anything, and still stayed in the small courtyard, silently putting sand into the porcelain plate, no more than 2 or 3 grains a day. He wasn't good at patience, but he didn't care. But Master Lu couldn't bear it, and came to the small courtyard again one night. He used his piercing discernment to carefully examine Jingjiu's situation, and found that Jingjiu still didn't have the Tao seed in his body, and couldn't help but feel disappointed. Without the Tao seed, the meridians couldn't grow, so how could he absorb the energy of heaven and earth? Without Jinyuan, how could the Tao seed become a towering tree and bear the sword fruit? By now, he was sure that Jingjiu wasn't a disciple taken in advance by a master of a peak. Jingjiu was able to instruct a fellow disciple in cultivation because of his excellent intelligence and comprehension. You deduced it out of thin air, and you were able to get it right 9 times out of 10. It seems that your family background is indeed extraordinary. Master Lu looked at him and said, I believe your family in Zhaoga City is not an ordinary family. Jingjiu said, My family has a lot of books. In the end, talent cannot be relied on. Empty talk is of no help to the great Tao. Unless you just want to use it as a test, and are not willing to work hard to refine your body, don't expect to enter the spiritual stability state. In the end, all your efforts will be in vain. Master Lu sighed and said, I've thought about it for a long time. If you insist on doing so, I can recommend you to a place where you can work as an attendant. Every day you'll be sorting out ancient books and researching knowledge. It should be very suitable for you. Jingjiu knew Jingjiu was talking about Shiyue Peak, the peak where the true sword methods of the Aoyama sect were kept, and where one could find the path among the piles of old books. Master Lu continued, Over there, you can still contribute to the sect and even be rewarded with elixirs to prolong your life. It's just that you won't have the right to be taught a real sword. But anyway, that's not your goal. Jingjiu was a little surprised. He did not expect that the other party would really care about him and had arranged a seemingly suitable backup plan for him. But of course, he wouldn't agree to it. He didn't like Shiyue Peak, and he would leave here 1 year later. Another spring had arrived, and willow catkins were fluttering all over the sky. More than half of the 3-year period had passed, and the outer disciples of the South Pine Pavilion were even more nervous. They were practicing every second of the day, and white smoke could be seen everywhere on the cliff plateau. By now, most of the disciples had entered the state of spiritual stability. Shui Yong, Yi and a few others could even see the possibility of achieving the consummate state of the spiritual ocean. Only a very small number of people who were too stupid or lazy could not see any hope. Of course, there was only one person who had the opportunity to enter the Aoyama sect to practice but was still lazy. Why are you looking for me? Master Lu asked, looking at Jingjiu standing in front of him. He was already numb to Jingjiu's lack of ambition. Although Jingjiu rarely left the small courtyard to come to the training hall to look for him, he was not interested. I'm ready to leave, Jingjiu said. Master Lu picked up his teacup and was about to take a few sips when he suddenly heard these words. His hand froze in midair. He had long given up on Jingjiu, but, in the end, he still cherished Jingjiu's talent and was unwilling to give up, so he did not expel Jingjiu from the sect. In the end, Jingjiu was going to give up? He didn't even want to appear to be dawdling anymore? Master Lu felt a little bored and said with a wry smile, Where are you going? Jingjiu thought for a moment and said, As for which peak, I haven't decided yet. Then think about it yourself. Whether it's that village or Chaoga, it's ultimately your own business. Wait. Master Lu suddenly came to his senses and asked, What did you say? Say it again? Jingjiu said, I said I haven't decided which peak to go to. Master Lu asked with some uncertainty, You mean the 9 peaks? Jingjiu said, Yes, I'm going to enter the inner sect. Master Lu doubted his own ears and said, Do you know what you're talking about? My spiritual ocean is basically full, and the state of spiritual stability should be considered consummate. Thinking back on the 2 years of incessant meditation and continuous absorption of the qi of heaven and earth, Even Jingjiu felt a little emotional. Master Lu did not believe such a thing at all. With a thought, he enveloped Jingjiu's body with his sword discernment, ready to punish Jingjiu harshly with the sect rules once he exposed Jingjiu's lies. At this time, he was really a little angry. There was a clatter. The teacup fell to the ground and shattered. The tea wet the ground, constantly emitting steam, like the white smoke rising from the heads of those diligent disciples in the forest. Master Lu looked at Jingjiu, his eyes full of shock and disbelief. There was silence in the training hall. "What's going on?" Master Lu was a little absent-minded, his voice trembling as he said, "Am I seeing things?" Jingjiu said, "You're not seeing things." There was a very long silence. The tea on the ground gradually cooled down, no longer emitting white steam. Master Lu finally calmed down, but he still looked at Jingjiu as if he was looking at a god, and his words were obviously apologetic and remorseful. "It turns out, I was still wrong." Jingjiu patted him on the shoulder and said, "It's not your fault." A sword light illuminated the cliff plateau, and the warm spring wind became a little bitingly cold. The immortal master of Shilai Peak arrived on his sword. Seeing this scene, the disciples stopped practicing and gathered in front of the training hall. Everyone guessed that there must be another disciple participating in the inner sect examination, and couldn't help but feel excited. Who would become the second inner sect disciple in the South Pine Pavilion after Lu Shui? Some thought it should be senior brother Yuan from Lelong County, and some guessed it might be the talented junior sister Yushan. More disciples thought that it should be Shui Yongyi. But then the disciples found that the three people they were talking about were beside them, not in the training hall. Shui Yongyi's face was a little gloomy. He was very close to the completion of the state of spiritual stability, and thought he would become the second person in the South Pine Pavilion after Lu Shui. Who would have thought that someone else would beat him to it? He stared at the entrance to the training hall, thinking bitterly in his heart, who on earth could hide so well that no one knew about it? The wind ruffled his white robe. Led by Master Lu, Jingjiu walked into the training hall. Seeing this scene, everyone was shocked speechless. They knew that Jingjiu was very smart and had a high comprehension, but they also knew that he had no intention of making progress and was extremely lazy. Who had seen him practice martial arts even once? How could such a person be able to complete the state of spiritual stability? How could he be qualified to participate in the inner sect examination? Shui Yongyi's face became extremely ugly. If it was another outer sect disciple who suddenly had an adventure and was one step ahead of him, even if he was angry, he could only accept the fact. But that person turned out to be Jingjiu, whom he had always despised the most. How is this possible? Chapter 19. That's ridiculous. Can the inner gate examination be messed with? Shui Yongyi started the discussion, and some disciples followed suit. Sister Yushan was disappointed to find that someone had taken the inner gate examination before her, but when she saw that person was Jingjiu, her disappointment turned into surprise. Why not? Everyone at the Waterpine Pavilion knows about Brother Jing. I think you're just jealous. She looked at the disciples led by Shui Yongyi and said with a sneer, "Are you ashamed of mocking brother too many times?" During the 2 years at the South Pine Pavilion, Jingjiu would occasionally answer questions from his peers. Though he didn't do it often, it was a very important help for these young people who had never practiced cultivation. Some disciples would choose to forget about the help and treat Jingjiu as a stranger. Some disciples would even mock Jingjiu because of the help they received, but most of them would still keep the gratitude in their hearts. They stood on Sister Yushan's side, made Shui Yongyi and the other disciples speechless, and cheered for Jingjiu, who had already entered the training hall. I thought his popularity was bad. Hearing the noise outside the training hall, Ming Xingguo was a bit surprised. The immortal master from Shilai Peak smiled and said, He is a celebrity after all. After saying this, the two of them looked at the tightly shut door. They were curious about whether Jingjiu could pass the inner gate examination, even more so than Lu Shisui a year ago. The outer gate disciples at the South Pine Pavilion were famous among the 9 peaks. The most famous was naturally Lu Shisui with natural Dao quality, and then Jingjiu. Everyone knew that a handsome youth in white had come to Aoyama sect. Some female disciples of Qingrong Peak even came to the South Pine Pavilion a few times to see what he looked like. But Jingjiu always stayed in his own small courtyard, so the female disciples of Qingrong Peak had to go back disappointed. Jingjiu wouldn't have become so famous if he was only born beautiful. The key was that he was also very lazy. This kind of contrast was very suitable for discussion. Just like what Ming Xinghua had said, many people thought that Jingjiu's relationship with others should be very bad because of these 2 points. It was naturally shameful to not strive for progress, but it was easy to attract jealousy to be extremely beautiful. Who would have thought that Jingjiu had not only reached the consummate state of spiritual stability, but also had so many fellow disciples on his side? All of a sudden, a chilly sword chime rang out from the closed door and spread to the surroundings of the cliff plateau. Ming Xinghua and the Shilai Peak immortal looked at each other and smiled. This sword chime was much weaker than the one Lu Shisui had caused, but it was still clear. At the main entrance of the training hall, Master Lu also heard the sword chime. His body suddenly relaxed and he revealed an emotional expression. In the quiet room, Jingjiu withdrew his gaze from the black sword embryo and turned to walk out. Apart from himself, no one knew that he hadn't placed his hand on the sword embryo, nor had he mobilized all of Jin Yuan. If he had done it like an ordinary disciple participating in the inner sect examination, he might have melted the sword embryo into a lump of iron. From beginning to end, he had only glanced at the sword embryo. The door of the training hall opened and Master Lu walked out with Jingjiu. He smiled at the disciples who had different expressions on their faces. Cheers rang out, and one could vaguely hear a few sounds of bad luck and spitting. Looking at the fellow disciples who came forward to congratulate him, Jingjiu greeted them calmly, but he felt a little strange. He didn't remember interacting with these people too much, and he didn't feel any friendship with them. He only remembered 2 or 3 of their names. Was the little girl with the plum bun called Yushan or Jinshan? Returning to the small courtyard, he looked around, and after a moment of silence, he left without any reluctance. The bamboo chair and sand table also disappeared. The peaks of Aoyama were shrouded in clouds all year round. Only when one arrived at the legendary 9 peaks would the clouds become much thinner. The clouds at the top of Tianguang Peak didn't disperse all year round, but they were much thinner than the rolling clouds at Yunqing Peak. White fog flowed slowly on the ground in front of the peak like a sea of clouds. Ancient stone doors and pavilions were faintly discernible in the distance, almost like a fairyland. 5 flying swords hovered above the sea of clouds in silence. These flying swords were either ancient and cold, or sharp and radiant, emitting an indescribable pressure. The 3-foot sword, the sword of emptiness, the sword of zither, the sword of returning sun, the sword of time. Among the main swords of the peaks of Aoyama sect, there were 5 of them. The sword of heaven of Tianguang Peak was the sword of the sect master, and wouldn't show itself easily. The thoughtless sword of Shinma Peak had ascended to the alien realm with martial grandmaster Jingyang. As for the lone sword of Liangwang Peak, it had disappeared for many years. That peak was the place where the young disciples cultivated their swordsmanship, so it usually didn't participate in the meetings of Aoyama sect. But why didn't the tied sword of Bihu Peak appear? Could it be that something had happened to this mountain peak that was ranked 7th? It was quiet at the top of the cliff. No one questioned the absence of the tied sword. An old voice came from the 3-foot sword. Maybe it was because the main sword of Shangda Peak was square in shape, so the voice sounded square as well. The owner of the voice was the sword justice of Aoyama sect, Yuan Qijing, the peak master of Shangda Peak, famous for his coldness. The letter of reward and punishment has been sent to all the peaks by flying swords. If there are no objections, it will be decided today. If the sect master didn't show up, Yuan Qijing had the highest position in Aoyama sect. Besides, he held great power and was cold, so few people would oppose his opinion. Today was no exception. A few voices came from the swords, no objections. A gentle and pleasant voice came from the zither sword. It should be the peak master of Qingrong Peak. Many disciples of the South Pine Pavilion have entered the inner gate, including a talented disciple like Lu Shui. Since young Master Lu has done a great service, why don't you reward him more? No voice came from the 3-foot sword, indicating that Yuan Qijing had acquiesced to the suggestion of the peak master of Qingrong. This was not unexpected to the peaks, because everybody knew that Lu of the South Pine Pavilion was his personal disciple. The voice of the peak master of Yunxing came from the empty sword. After young senior master's ascension, our sect has become even more famous than before. I think nobody will dare disturb us in the next 10 years. However, we have to hope for the future. Every time I think of those talented youths of Zhaoga and the underworld at the plum meeting, and those ice-eating monsters, I'm worried. Fortunately, young Master Zhua has Zhao Leiyu, and he is 10 years old now, so I'm very relieved. The peak master of Qingrong said, young Master Zhua is behind closed doors, and Zhao Leiyu is cultivating diligently on your peak. But Lu Shui is still too young. Should we summon him to the peak in advance? The voice of Yuan Qijing rang out again, still as cold as before. My concern is whether Lu Shui has the natural Dao quality or not. When Zhao Leiyu was born in Zhaoga, I sent someone to take care of her, so I know her situation well. But what about this Lu Shui? The voice of the peak master of Qingrong grew even colder. Big brother, don't be suspicious, she said. I've checked on Lu Shui myself. There's nothing wrong with him. By now Yuan Qijing knew that she had gone to see Lu Shui. After a moment of silence he asked, when did it happen? 1 year ago, said the peak master of Qingrong. Normally, Yuan Qijing should drop the subject since the peak master of Qingrong had checked on Lu Shui herself and had a clear intention to protect him. But he still said, I've also checked on him. He had learned a rare breathing method before he entered the mountain gate. I suspect he is a spy, so we should investigate him thoroughly. Yet, the voice of the peak master of Qingrong was calm, as she said nonchalantly, since you've checked on him, you should know that he is not a spy. The other 3 swords remained silent, but the 3 peak masters hiding behind the swords, perhaps 10 miles away, had heard the conversation clearly. Sensing the implied meaning in the words of the peak master of Qingrong, they knew that this was the end of the day. As expected, Yuan Qijing didn't say anything after hearing what the peak master of Qingrong said. However, the peak master of Qingrong didn't insist on calling Lu Shui to the 9 peaks ahead of time. A moment later, the 5 flying swords dispersed, and the ocean of clouds on the top of the cliff returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. It was very cold on the top of the Shangda Peak, especially after the sword light entered the stone room. The temperature dropped a few degrees, and a layer of frost instantly appeared on the stone walls. The main sword of this peak, which was responsible for monitoring the whole Aoyama sect, was called the 3-foot sword. The name of this sword was not derived from the saying God is watching 3 feet above his head, but from the saying, it takes more than 1 day's cold to freeze 3 feet of ice. In the deep end of the manor cave, an old man looked at the frost on the wall, remaining silent. The peak master of Shangda Peak, Yuan Qijing, was in charge of the sword justice, and his status in the Aoyama sect was second only to that of the sect master. He had a cold and gloomy temperament, and was feared by the disciples of the younger generation. It seems that the disciple named Lu Shui was indeed chosen by one of the peaks in advance. The middle-aged sword master who spoke was Qi Yan, Yuan Qijing's young brother of the same peak. It seemed that he had listened to the entire meeting. A hint of coldness flashed in Yuan Qijing's deep-set eyes. Over the years, more and more such things had happened in the Aoyama sect. In order to ensure the inheritance and development of the sect, the peaks had gotten used to planning ahead of time, looking for talented disciples in the world to bestow favors on them, and even teaching them the mental methods in secret. With such predestined relationships, it would be easier for them to compete for talents at the inherited sword competition in the future. The talented junior master Zhua, who was staying behind closed doors on the Tianguang Peak, received a jade pendant from the sect master at the age of 6. The young people on Liangwang Peak had also been contacted by the peaks before they entered the mountain gate. Zhao Leia was protected by the Aoyama sect even before she was born, and she was brought to the mountain gate at the age of 12. The only problem was that no one knew which peak had found Zhao Leia. The answer to this mystery could only be revealed at the inherited sword competition 1 year later. Of course, due to the rules of the Aoyama sect, the peaks might not be able to compete for the desired disciple even if they had prepared in advance, but it was still better than nothing. What Qi Yan said was based on this judgment, but he was still curious why his big brother didn't say anything else after the peak master of Qingrong said that. Did his big brother already know what kind of breathing method Lu Shui had practiced in advance? The human breathing method. Yuan Qijing's voice was very cold, as if mixed with the wind and snow. Hearing this, Qi Yan was slightly startled, thinking that Lu Shui was the disciple chosen by the sect master. No wonder the peak master of Qingrong didn't point it out, and his big brother didn't continue. Thinking of this, he felt a bit regretful and also a bit angry. It seemed that neither his big brother nor himself would be able to compete for Lu Shui at the inherited sword competition 1 year later. No matter how special the position of Shangda Peak was in the Aoyama sect, it couldn't be compared to the Tianguang Peak, where the sect master was. We already have Junior Master Zhua, and half of the disciples on Liangwang Peak are his, and now we still need Lu Shui, Qi Yan sighed, saying, in this case we can't miss another disciple with natural Dao quality. Though he said this, he didn't have much confidence. Among all the peaks in Aoyama, who didn't want Zhao Lei to inherit the sword? Thinking of something, he said, Junior Master Lu has done well at the South Pine Pavilion in the last 2 years. I heard that another disciple has passed the inner gate examination. Should I go and observe him? What's his name? Asked Yuan Qijing expressionlessly. Jingjiu, said Qi Yan. Chapter 20. Qi Yan let out a bitter smile. He knew very well what kind of people his big brother hated the most. Even when he mentioned the young senior master, his big brother didn't have a good expression on his face. He changed the topic hastily, saying, I thought the peaks would ask about Bihu Peak today. Yuan Qijing sneered. Who dares to ask if the sect master doesn't allow it? Qi Yan said uneasily, even if they don't ask, they still have to give an answer. Yuan Qijing said, just say that young brother Lei was sneak attacked by Bulo Lin and the underworld in Zhaoga City, and was wounded. He is recuperating now. Qi Yan nodded in silence. He of course knew it wasn't true. Lei Poyan, the peak master of Bihu Peak, had gone mad. He had gone mad when he was sent to Shanghai Peak from Tianguang Peak. Yuan Qijing walked to the deep end of the manor cave, and came to the front of the well. The top of Shangda Peak was thousands of feet above the ground. Even if there was some water in the mountain wall, it was impossible to draw it out. It was really strange that there was a well here. The mouth of the well was dark, and it was unclear how deep it was. In the whole of Aoyama sect, only the important figures knew that this deep well led to the sword jail under the ground. The demons that nobody wanted to face and the traitors were locked up in the sword jail. A dreadful voice rang out from the bottom of the dark well. The source of the voice should be quite far away, and it sounded a bit muffled, but the hatred and madness hidden in the voice were quite clear. Even if it's not the first, what about the second? The voice was full of resentment, like the wailing of a ghost, making those who heard it feel scared. Qi Yan had been in the state of free travel for many years and could be called a godly swordsman, but his face still turned pale when he heard the voice. Maybe it was because the madman in the deepest part of the sword jail was the peak master of Bihu Peak with a high status in Aoyama sect. Yuan Qijing asked, "What should we do? We can't keep Senior Master Lei locked up all the time. He keeps shouting the same words, but we don't know what he means. How can we investigate? Why can't we keep him locked up all the time? I don't care why he went crazy, and I don't care if he was really crazy when he attacked. Since he dared to disrespect the sect leader, he should be locked up." Yuan Qijing looked at the bottom of the well and listened to the shrill cry. His expression was very ugly. No 1-2. No 1-2. Qi Yan did not understand this sentence. Not many people in the entire Aoyama sect could understand this sentence. He understood. He even knew that it was because of these words that Lei Poyan had gone mad. But if it was the sect leader who made him go crazy, why didn't he just let him die? The dead will never speak, be it the truth or the madness. Why did the sect leader send him to Shangda Peak? Was it really because the heavens cared for all living things? Or what are you trying to test me with this madman? Jingjiu stroked the slightly hot bracelet as he walked into the quiet and secluded small building. This small building was behind the South Pine Pavilion. After walking along the mountain road for 7 li, it suddenly appeared in front of him. It was like a barrier that separated the two worlds. He knew why the bracelet was warm. It was because the portraits of its previous owners were in this small building. This small building enshrined the portraits of the past sect masters and other important figures of the Aoyama sect. Liangwang Peak represented the Aoyama sect in the battles against the outside world. It was the peak that shed the most blood, so the previous peak masters were naturally qualified to be called important figures. However, cultivation practitioners had a long life. Even though most of the peak masters of Liangwang Peak died in battle, there were only 7 portraits in this small building. Following the bracelet's wish, Jingjiu looked at all 7 portraits. As for the more conspicuous portraits of the past patriarchs, he did not look at them. At the end of the long corridor, he stopped in front of a portrait. The portrait looked a little new, so it should have been hung there for a few years. It was a portrait of the immortal Jingyang. Jingjiu looked at the face in the portrait in silence for a long time and said, "I have almost forgotten what you look like." Walking out of the small building, he left the mortal world and came to the inner gate of the Aoyama sect. Jingjiu looked up and saw all the peaks of Aoyama had disappeared, leaving only the 9 peaks standing under the firmament. The clouds did not flow among the peak. They hung like an umbrella or a cover, and the thinnest part was like a piece of paper. The scenery was extremely beautiful. Master Lu was waiting for him outside the building. Seeing his thoughtful expression, he couldn't help but smile, thinking that he finally saw some reaction from this lad. Then he remembered that when he first entered the inner gate and saw the 9 peaks, he was also stunned. He couldn't help but feel sentimental. Over the years, he had been unable to enter the state of free travel. His lifespan was limited and his future was bleak. So he had to leave the 9 peaks and become an immortal teacher. If he hadn't heard those words by chance and searched around Cloudy Town patiently, and finally found Lu Shisui and Jingjiu in that small village, he would have spent the rest of his life in the South Pine Pavilion. Now, he was rewarded with a top-class elixir because of his meritorious service and could go back to the Shanghai Peak to continue his cultivation. Maybe he would really break through the state of free travel one day. "Brother Jing, what are you thinking about?" Master Lu asked with a smile. As long as they entered the inner gate, they would call each other brother and sister because they were all disciples of the 3rd generation. As for the specific inheritance, it would be decided after the inherited sword competition. Of course, one had to be chosen by a master of a peak. Master Lu was born in the Shanghai Peak, so he naturally hoped that Jingjiu could go to the Shanghai Peak to cultivate in the future. Jingjiu said, "The immortal Jingyang ascended, not died. Why is his portrait also hung in the building?" Master Lu was stunned. He didn't expect that he would ask such a question. He thought that Brother Jing was really different from the common people. Countless disciples had admired the portraits of the past patriarchs in that small building, but who would have thought of this? He couldn't answer this question, so he could only smile bitterly. Then he said seriously, "I will go back to the peak to cultivate in seclusion. I don't know when we will meet again. Take care, brother." Jingjiu looked at him and said, "I don't think you'll have any problem." Master Lu smiled bitterly again, thinking that Brother Jing was really a wonderful person. There was a stream between the 9 peaks. All kinds of buildings were scattered along the river, including small courtyards and tall buildings. There were also many caves among the cliff. Before the inherited sword competition, which was held once every 3 years, the young disciples who were recruited into the inner gate would all learn swordsmanship here. No one knew whether it was because the disciples often washed their swords by the stream or for some other reason, but this stream had a name: Stream of Sword Washing. And this stage of cultivation for the disciples of Aoyama was called sword washing. Here, the disciples needed to break through 1 or 2 states of knowledge comprehension and defense, until they reached the 3rd level. Only then could they be qualified to participate in the inherited sword competition. If a disciple was chosen by a master in the inherited sword competition, that disciple could become a personal disciple and learn the real sword skills of Aoyama sect. Of course, that disciple could also sign up to enter Liangwang Peak, if those arrogant senior brothers on Liangwang Peak liked him. Liangwang Peak had a very special position in Aoyama sect. There was no inheritance or master on this peak, but the disciples on the peak could receive the most patient and strictest education from all the masters of the 9 peaks. Because Liangwang Peak was the sword of Aoyama sect. Besides cultivation, the most important thing for the disciples of Liangwang Peak was to represent Aoyama sect to fight against the outside world, fighting against those horrible demons and the swordsmen of the underworld. Of course, it was very dangerous to become a disciple of Liangwang Peak, but it was also very beneficial to keep fighting. More importantly, this was a great honor to begin with. If one couldn't break through the 2 states no matter how hard he cultivated by the stream of sword washing, he couldn't participate in the inherited sword competition, and he couldn't be chosen as a personal disciple by any of the peaks. What should he do? This kind of situation rarely happened, but it didn't mean that it had never happened before. This was the first question Jingjiu heard when he came to the stream and faced the senior master from Shilai Peak. Jingjiu thought about it carefully and then said, "I've never thought about this question." It was true that he had never thought about it, but his words sounded a bit arrogant in the ears of others. The senior master from Shirui Peak didn't get angry, but laughed instead. He patted on Jingjiu's shoulder and said, "You are indeed Jingjiu. This is the perfect answer." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.